more tough due to the global pandemic and should hold this seminar virtually because the lockdown. May the force and spirit be with us all. First of all, thank you to the invitees and also participants who have attended today's NBS webinar series. The second one, actually, entitled Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solution to Support Sustainable Urban Planning, atau in bahasa, mainstreaming solusi berbasis alam untuk mendukung perencanaan perkotaan berkelanjutan. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so this webinar may go smoothly. Sebelum kita mulai, saya ingin membahas beberapa peraturan agar webinar ini berjalan dengan lancar. The first one, to all the participants, please rename your account with your full name and your affiliation or institution. Kepada semua peserta, diharapkan dapat mengganti nama akun Anda dengan nama lengkap dan afiliasi ataupun institusi Anda. Lalu, kemudian silahkan isi form absensi dan kuesioner di link yang sudah disediakan di chat box, dan untuk partisipan yang mengikuti melalui YouTube Live diharapkan cek di YouTube Live chat kami. Then please fill in the attendance form and questionnaire at the link provided in the chat box. And who are listening or streaming through YouTube, you can find the link in YouTube Live chat. To all panelists, please turn off your microphone during the webinar, and if possible, please turn on your video. Kepada semua panelis, mohon matikan mikrofon Anda dan selama webinar berlangsung, dan jika memungkinkan aktifkan video Anda. Here, the participant, please turn off your microphone and video during the webinar. Peserta diharapkan mematikan mikrofon dan juga video Anda selama webinar berlangsung. And then for those who want to ask question, please write down your question in Padlet through the link we provide in the chat box, because we have unactivated chat room feature in Zoom. Bagi Anda yang ingin bertanya, silakan tulis pertanyaan Anda di link Padlet yang telah kami sediakan dan kami sudah share melalui chat Zoom dan juga melalui YouTube chat live. Selected question will be addressed in Q&A and discussion session. Pertanyaan terpilih akan dibahas dalam sesi tanya jawab dan diskusi yang nantinya akan dilaksanakan. You also can find all the panelist presentation at the following link that have been shared by our host. Anda juga dapat menemukan semua presentasi panelis yang sudah dikirimkan melalui link yang ada dalam chat box dan juga YouTube live chat. And the last, please be concerned that this webinar is being recorded and save all the presentation. You will be sent the link afterwards in case you miss anything or we are going too quickly. You will be able to see it again later on. Dan yang terakhir, Anda akan dikirimi tautan setelahnya jika Anda melewatkan sesuatu atau kami berbicara terlalu cepat. Itu akan bisa Anda tonton selanjutnya melalui YouTube akun RDI kan. YouTube akun RDI Indonesia. We also have Nadia as our guide, and you can find her in chat room. She will be guiding this webinar, and if you get a technical issue using Zoom feature, sound, screen, or anything about the link, just asking her through the chat, through the Zoom chat. Di sini juga hadir Nadia sebagai pemandu untuk acara ini, dan Anda dapat mencarinya di partisipan, dan juga jika ada technical issue ataupun permasalahan terkait Zoom feature, bisa langsung menghubungi Nadia. Present with us, our honorable panelist, Dr. Alex Lerner from University of Lincoln and Dr. John Miguel Kanai from University of Sheffield. Good morning for both of you. Dan hadir juga panelis kita dari Dinas Penataan Ruang Kota Bandung, Ibu Yuni Sri Handayani, STMT MN, dan juga Pak Dr. Saud Sagala from Bandung Institute of Technology and Resilience Development Initiative. Selamat sore, Pak Saud dan Bu Yuni.
Selamat sore.
Present with us our honorable discussant who will be driving this discussion today, Dr. Hendrikus Andi Smarmata from Indonesia Planner Association, and Mr. Tony Wijarsono, MRP from Urban Planning Consultant, the World Bank. Selamat sore, Pak Tony dan juga Dr. Hendrikus Andi. We're really glad to have you here. Sebelum masuk ke acara yang lebih dalam lagi, perkenalkan saya Danang Azhari. bisa dipanggil Dana, yang akan menjadi moderator pada hari ini. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Dana Azhari, or you can call me Dana, one of the RDI staff, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Kegiatan ini merupakan bagian dari penelitian kolaborasi antara RDI dan Sheffield University dan juga University of Lincoln berjudul Nature-Based Solution for Urban Disaster Mitigation in Middle Income Countries yang didanai oleh Royal Academy of Engineering UK. Dan kami juga berterima kasih kepada partner kami, yaitu Institut Teknologi Bandung dan juga Dinas Penataan Ruang yang membantu kami dalam pelaksanaan webinar ini. This event is part of collaborative research between RDI, Sheffield University, and University of Lincoln entitled Nature-Based Solution for Urban Disaster Mitigation in Middle-Income Countries, which is funded by Royal Academy of Engineering UK. We also would like to thank our partners who will help to implement this webinar series, the Bandung Spatial Planning Office and the Bandung Institute of Technology. Sebelum kita masuk lagi, saya akan menjelaskan sedikit terkait dengan poin-poin dari webinar sebelumnya, di mana Dr. John Miguel meng-highlight terkait pendekatan berbasis pelayanan ekosistem, terutama nature-based solution, itu akan menjadi potensi yang baik untuk dikembangkan di negara-negara berkembang, terutama di Indonesia. Lalu, Dr. Alexander juga menyebutkan bahwa perubahan iklim semakin meningkatkan permasalahan lingkungan di Asia. Oleh karena itu, NBS perlu diterapkan secara sistematis pada tingkat lokal di Indonesia maupun di Southeast Asia. Lalu Dr. Saud Sagala juga menyetujui hal-hal tersebut dan menambahkan bahwa evaluasi pendekatan yang dilakukan saat ini dan juga inovasi penerapan NBS dapat dijadikan awal untuk mengurangi risiko bencana hidrometeorologi di Indonesia, terutama di Bandung. Lalu diskusan kita juga, Dr. Beta Paramita dan Dr. Tri Mulyani menyetujui hal tersebut, namun perlu adanya pendekatan holistik di Indonesia dalam penerapan NBS agar sesuai dengan kebutuhan dan karakteristik di Indonesia. Webinar ini bertujuan untuk mendorong kegiatan diskusi mengenai strategi penerapan nature-based solution yang paling menjanjikan sekaligus pihak-pihak yang terlibat di dalamnya dan indikator yang memungkinkan serta untuk mencapai kesuksesan implementasi NBS di Indonesia terutama dan Southeast Asia. Partisipan di Zoom dan di YouTube diharapkan mengisi daftar hadir dan juga kuesioner yang telah di-share melalui kolom chat Zoom dan chat YouTube Live. Just a reminder, participant on Zoom and YouTube, please fill in the attendance list and also the questionnaire that has been shared through the Zoom chat and also YouTube Live chat. Sebelum saya memperkenalkan pembicara pada sore hari ini, mari kita dengarkan sambutan dari Program Manager dari Resilience Development Initiative untuk secara resmi juga membuka acara pada hari ini. Kepada Mr. Adrian Sasongko STMSC, Anda memiliki waktu 5 menit untuk melakukan sambutan. Kami persilakan.
Thank you, Dana, for the time. So let me introduce RDI to you. Maybe going to the next slide, please. Yeah, and we are RDI. We are an Indonesian think tank initiative that focuses on the issues such as disaster and climate resilience, renewable energy, gender equality, children welfare, and sustainable development, among others. And we have 7 research clusters, which is including renewable energy and emission reduction, disaster and climate resilience, children's social welfare and health, regional and urban policy, or RUP, finance and business management, tourism and cultural heritage, and water and waste management. Next. Until now, actually, the number is already, we have already like 95 fellows from 30 countries. And it across the globe, which is include from the Europe, Asia, and also Africa, and also America. Next. And for the disaster and climate resilience, we had a plan that we have 5 pillars for the 2021 and 2024. The first pillar would be community resilience. The second is the one that we are right now discussing. It's about the nature-based solution. The third is resilient and smart city. The fourth is risk governance. And the fifth is trustworthy hazard. Next. For more information, you can also look at our website. And this is our ongoing research project right now. Among others, we have Southeast Asia Resilience Hub, or SEARCH. This is funded by the GCRF networking grant from 2019 and 2021. And it links scholars and practitioners from Southeast Asia and the UK around the topic of disaster risk management, community response, and socioeconomic factors of coastal communities in the Southeast Asia region. And also we have nature-based solution for urban disaster, mitigation in middle-income countries. It's funded by Royal Academy of Engineering from 2020 and 2021. And this is an interdisciplinary network, including human geography, urban planning, landscape ecology, and environmental engineering to promote and the incorporation of the NBS to city resilience strategies, inspire further South-South comparative analysis and collaborative learning, which is right now we are discussing in this session. And then our next ongoing research projects are from the GNDR, which is the Making Displacement Safer, is locally led disaster risk reduction solution for displaced population in urban areas. And this project is aimed to contribute to the substantial reduction of disaster risk losses in lives, livelihoods, and assets for displaced population in urban areas. And also, the next project that we are going to have is HUMAIN, which is the interdisciplinary partnership in co-designing community-based measures to address emerging conflict in Indonesia and its spillovers in Malaysia. It's funded by AHRC from 2021 to 2022. It built community-based measures to prevent conflict arising from forest management and forest fire before it escalates further, anticipating potential threats and limiting their effects. Next. And here is like the source of the funding for our projects. We have diverse sources of funding, as you can see, and also maybe next. This is for our partners. We have the first partner, not only from the university, but also we have various partners from a non-governmental organization and civil society organization, but including from Indonesia and also from other countries in regional and also from other. Next. Thank you. And I hope you will enjoy our discussion this afternoon. And I give it to you, Dana.
Oke, terima kasih Kak Adrian Sasongko STMSC. Sebelum kita masuk ke pemaparan oleh Bapak Ibu panelis kita, saya ingin memberikan pemanasan sedikit terkait nature-based solution. Tetapi ini tidak akan ada jawaban yang benar ataupun salah. Jadi kepada Bapak Ibu sekalian, silakan memberi jawaban berdasarkan pendapat ataupun pengalaman Anda selama ini. Jadi jika Anda sudah siap, silakan membuka menti.com dan gunakan kode 4200345. Dan sudah di-share juga melalui chat Zoom kita. Okay. Are you all ready for the first question? Untuk pertanyaan pertama, apa yang Anda ketahui tentang nature-based solution ataupun NBS atau solusi berbasis alam? What do you know about nature-based solution or NBS? We already have two answers here. So you can go to the menti.com and use the code 4200345. 00345 to participate in this quiz. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian dapat mengikuti quiz ini melalui www.menti.com dan menggunakan kode 4200345. Oke, sudah ada 5 jawaban. There are 5 answers for the first question. Maybe we have to wait a little bit more, like yep, it's already 7, so let's see what are the answer for the first question. Okay, so tanaman, solusi yang alami, a natural solution, ecosystem, solution-based, ecology-based solution, adaptive, quite interesting. Take here, masalah global, a global issues, dan yang paling banyak itu adalah hijau or green. Nice. So a lot of you have known what natural-based solution are. Resilient, urban innovation, it's quite a part of NBS actually. Dan hijau tanaman juga merupakan bagian dari natural-based solution atau solusi berbasis alam. Okay, so we can move on to the next question. So the second question is, what are the biggest challenges in implementing NBS in your area? Apa tantangan terbesar dalam implementasi natural-based solution di daerah Anda? Silakan Bapak Ibu untuk menjawab pertanyaannya. Jadi tidak ada jawaban yang benar ataupun salah ya Bapak Ibu. Ini hanya kita ingin memberikan pemanasan saja terkait pengetahuan Bapak Ibu terkait natural-based solution. Okay, so there are 4 answers already. Kesadaran masyarakat. Okay, this is quite a nice take. Lalu biaya pembebasan lahan. Yep. Cost for the land conversion is quite big, actually. Oh, knowledge. Yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges in Indonesia because there's a knowledge gap in solar and also in the public perspective of NBS. Oh, and design ideas. Okay, quite nice. And also the policy. Yep, the policy also a big challenges in Indonesia. And here with us is Bu Yani from the government. So she will give us a perspective or the perspective in the policy in natural-based solution. Jadi hadir bersama kita juga Bu Yuni dari Distaru Kota Bandung yang akan memberikan perspektif terkait kebijakan Pemda dalam penanganan natural-based solution. Oke, kita langsung ke pertanyaan terakhir. Pertanyaannya, bagaimana harapan Anda terhadap penerapan natural-based solution di Indonesia? How do you expect the implementation of NBS in Indonesia? Mungkin dapat mengurangi banjir atau dapat mengurangi kekeringan di daerah saya atau bisa diterapkan segera seperti itu. Okay, we have 3 answer already. The first one, hope it's good and inclusive for all the community. Nice. Yang inklusif bagi semua golongan ini cukup menarik karena salah satu yang ditekankan dalam NBS itu sendiri adalah inclusion dan integration of course. Lalu integrasi dengan perencanaan tata ruang. Yup, this is so true. And wholesome. Okay, scaling up. Viralkan. Ini sangat-sangat menarik sekali. Jawaban-jawabannya mampu menerapkan dalam lokal konten. dan mengurangi banjir, reducing the flood risk, and increasing the green open space. Oh, nice. Oke, jadi berdasarkan atas pertanyaan-pertanyaan ini, saya melihat bahwa Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah mengerti terkait dengan Nature Based Solution. Jadi kita dapat langsung ke panelis-panelis kita yang akan menjabarkan lebih dalam lagi terkait Nature Based Solution. Oke, untuk selanjutnya sebelum masuk ke dalam sesi yang kita tunggu-tunggu, saya ingin mengundang semua panelis dan juga diskusan untuk berfoto bersama. Untuk semua panelis, harap aktifkan kamera Anda kalian. So all of our honorable panelists and discussant, please turn on the camera so we can take the photos. Okay. Anyone from the committee can help me to take the photos, please? Okay. Everyone ready for the photos? Dalam hitungan 3 akan saya foto ya Bapak Ibu. In the count of 3, I will take the photos. 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for your participation in these photos. Untuk acara selanjutnya, saya akan memperkenalkan pembicara pertama pada hari ini, Dr. Juan Miguel Canay. Beliau merupakan peneliti urban geographer dan juga dosen di Departemen Human Geography, Sheffield University. Karyanya melibatkan urbanisasi dunia di bawah kapitalisme global kontemporer. Presentasi dari Dr. Miguel bertopik How to Make Nature-Based Solutions Operational in Their Design, Execution, and Management, atau operasionalisasi NBS, desain, eksekusi, dan juga pengelolaan. Untuk partisipan yang nantinya ingin akan bertanya, silahkan langsung menuliskan pertanyaannya melalui Padlet link yang sudah kami sediakan, dan juga harap menuliskan nama dan juga asal dari penanya. For the participant who have question to the speaker, please fill in the question via the link provided through the chat feature column on Zoom and YouTube Live. Please also address your name and affiliation. Dr. Miguel Canay, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
You have 20 minutes for your presentation. Dr. Miguel, the time is yours.
Will you be forwarding the slides for me?
Oh, yeah.
Or someone will be forwarding the slides for me, or
yes,
because
I'm not presenting the slide.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, it's very good to be back with all of you. Once again, thank you, RDI, everyone involved for this great organization, especially Dana today. I know how difficult it is to hold a meeting in one language, so let alone two. You're doing a fantastic job. Thank you very much. Now into my presentation. I was given quite a challenging brief about how to make NBS operational. And my presentation is going to revolve around the challenges of operationalizing, implementing NBS. If we can move to the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to start by mentioning a report that was very recently published by the European Research Commission. You know, the ERC has been putting a lot of emphasis on nature-based solutions, and in December 2020, they released this summary report of the state of the art in EU-funded projects. So, to my knowledge, one of the most comprehensive evaluation of what has been done so far and to what effects. And from this, we can learn that to operationalize nature-based solutions, we need to meet at least 7 main conditions. They need to be cost-effective. The benefits need to span across environmental, economic, and social realms. These solutions need to be locally adapted. They also need to be systemic, not piecemeals as interventions. They need to be resource efficient. They need to enhance biodiversity. And they also need to support the delivery of ecosystem services. So 7 conditions altogether. Next slide, please. The general conclusions in this report are, I apologize because somehow the slides are not showing right. I imagine it's because it's not showing from my computer. So there's a problem with the font. So I apologize in advance for that. But we'll try to make do as is rather than stopping and starting again. But so the general conclusions in this report tell us again that it's quite difficult to generalize and provide clear-cut policy guidelines. Still, there are many individual successes. They are increasing exponentially, and they provide many opportunities for us to learn from them. One of such experiences in the European Union is the Netherlands program of Room for the River, an ecologically orientated, multi-purpose river restoration and environmental adaptation program that offers many, many lessons. But overall, NBS remain novel. This is still not fully consolidated in terms of policy applications and general rules that we can apply. We still face several knowledge gaps, and much further research is needed to guide innovative projects. Next slide, please. As the experiences increase and our knowledge also expands, there are several resources that are worth considering in terms of how to go about doing this kind of comparative research. I wanted to mention one of the multiple resources actually that the European Union has made available, and that's the OPLA platform, which is a repository of nature-based solutions experiences. And this is not a European repository only, it also includes global experiences. OPLA has these case studies as well as multiple other interactive functions, including some kind of tailored advice for people who requested, who sign up for the website. This is community-sourced, user-sourced advice. So it's something to consider, the OPLA website, if you were not familiar with it before. I just wanted to mention that. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay. Another dimension to consider when we are looking at nature-based solutions is that issue of size of the intervention, the geographical scale that it addresses. And here we have some contrast between the small, the site-specific project and the more ambitious district-wide, city-wide, or regional projects. When we look at proven successes more short-term realizable benefits, the small scale is ahead. We have many more better documented projects implemented at the small scale, where, for example, different forms of green infrastructure, green walls, green fences, green roofs are overlaid in pre-existing cities, in already existing built-up areas. So these are easier to implement, their benefits accrue quicker, and the risks are lower. However, no risk, no gain, we say in Spanish, and larger projects have the potential of proving truly transformational. Here we need to think how the small may aggregate towards the large, how we can make sure that a synergy exists between these more site-specific interventions so they don't become piecemeal improvements. And for that, we need to implement what we call network think. Think about ways of aggregating, synergizing effects. Look at connectors between the small and the large scale. I'm part of a consortium that's sponsored by the ERC in the Horizon 2020 program, looking at European and Latin American cities. And one of our aims is to look at that meso scale, the medium level, and how this helps span the site to the region. So that's a very important consideration to think when we decide projects, think how their effects aggregate. So here again, broader ecosystem functioning needs to be brought into the design to think how these issues aggregate. Thank you for the reminder. We'll go to the next slide now. So about financing. Here again, there's no ready-made solutions yet. We need to be innovative with how public finance is designed to support NBS. We need to create new business models. One example, for example, for when we talk about disaster risk reduction, can be to link NBS to financing and insurance industry and reinsurance. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. It's reinsurance rather than refinance. So the insurance of the insurers. So how do NBS factor in to their algorithms of risk premiums and insurance costs, and that could be a source of project financing. Another area of opportunity to be created about NBS is to leverage the multifunctionality to better map how these multiple benefits address and help report against SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And this can be used for international cooperation funding, which is increasingly anchored in the SDGs protocols. Next slide, please. Regarding implementation and management, a common approach within the European Union and beyond is that of the Living Labs. This is something we're now considering how to implement it, given the realities of Latin American cities. But Living Labs, with their experimental, user-centric approach, can help us avoid governmental silos, this kind of one department does one thing, the other department does another thing. Look at ways of managing uncertainty through iterative participatory experimentation, foster co-production, co-creation of sites and solutions with multiple partners, and by the way, implement educational programs which are highly needed, particularly in the Latin American context, and raise awareness about existing risks, but also potential benefits. This can also bring in multiple community stakeholders and social organizations in the labs through different ways, through different forms of participation, citizen science, for example, uses of the sites due to the multifunctionality. NBS tend to be places that are quite attractive for people for multiple uses. And finally, this is essential to keep scientific and communities engaged, but not as leaders, but as equal partners. This is essential to guarantee it through co-production. Next slide, please. So, a word on management and upkeep. This kind of openness for people to engage is essential to enroll people who will actually be will be essential for the upkeep of places. What some colleagues in the Department of Landscape at Sheffield, like Dr. Nicola Danson, have discussed as placekeeping. So we need these placekeepers, and we have to make sure that they are on board. As I mentioned before, citizen science for monitoring complex environmental processes and outcomes. And this monitoring, learning of how to do it in a grassroots way, can be combined with educational and awareness roles. When you teach people how to monitor, for example, air or water quality, you also teach them about the issues related to those indicators. Why does it matter, for example, that there's particular matter in the atmosphere? Because NBS tend to be quite attractive, they can be mobilized to foster civic pride. They will be crown jewels of cities, local assets. And finally, something that it is an interesting paradox related to the conservation side of NBS. And that's the fact that the closer you want to bring an NBS to a comprehensive restoration rather than rehabilitation, the more you want to recreate conditions closest to pristine nature, the more management you will need to keep that up afterwards within complex, diverse, fragmented, and unequal urban areas. So last slide, please. In conclusion, what I wanted to share today is that NBS are still what we can call an emerging option for policy, but their use is rapidly accelerating worldwide. So are the data that are available and the research that's being produced. The EU is the case that I mentioned today, an important provider of data tools, but there are also other institutions the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the United Nations Environmental Program, and the World Bank. The World Bank has actually a database on NBS and natural risk for natural disasters. Because of the situation that the emergent characteristic of NBS, we need to be creative when we look to policy innovation for the design, implementation, and management of these options, and openness to co-creation and participation of multiple stakeholders is essential, communities, including academic communities. Finally, financing remains a challenge, but we also need to better understand how, when, and where the multiple benefits of NBS accrues. These are not only benefits that can be monetized, translated into money terms. And one way of expanding this mapping inquiry on the benefits is understanding how different people could benefit, and how they can be included in the use and upkeep of NBS, both as beneficiaries as well as co-producers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Miguel. Such an interesting point. These are some key points from Dr. Miguel's presentation. I will explain a little bit more in Bahasa Indonesia. Sejauh ini, nature-based solution masih dikategorikan sebagai pendekatan yang baru dan masih memiliki gap ataupun celah untuk penelitian lebih lanjut. Selain itu, inovasi terkait skala proyek, pembiayaan, implementasi, serta pengelolaan dan pemeliharaan pun diperlukan. Dalam mengembangkan NBS, masalah material seperti pembiayaan juga sangat mencolok, dan sehingga itu perlu juga dipertimbangkan kembali dan mungkin ditingkatkan lagi penelitian terkait hal tersebut agar hal tersebut tidak menjadi kendala, dan perlu dipertimbangkan juga terkait manfaat non-material yang dihasilkan dari nature-based solution itu sendiri sering terhitung sejak awal. Okay, so that's all from Dr. Miguel. Thank you so much, Dr. Miguel, for the presentation. Selanjutnya, saya akan memperkenalkan pembicara kedua kita pada hari ini, Dr. Alex Lochner. Beliau merupakan seorang dosen di University of Lincoln dan juga ahli ekologi lanskap dengan pengalaman dalam menerapkan permodelan eksplisit, spasial ataupun biologi konservasi, dan pengelolaan sumber daya alam. Presentasi dari Dr. Alex Lochner berjudul A Spatial Planning Perspective on NBS or in Indonesia, perspektif perencanaan spasial dalam penerapan nature-based solution. Dr. Alex, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. I can't see the slides yet, though.
Okay.
So I'll just talk. So thank you very much, RDI, for doing all the hard work, getting the workshops, the seminars together. They're doing a fantastic job. And thank you very much to the audience and also the discussants as well. It's really fantastic to be part of this really exciting event. So if we could have the first slide. So what I'll be presenting on the range of, I guess, what we would call leading practice academic tools, spatial tools, especially the GIS tools, the spatial modeling methods that have been developed in academia and are slowly making its way into the operationalization and assessment of the positive benefits of nature-based solutions and how we can plan for those nature-based solutions. So next slide, please. So I'm going to present 4 case studies, of which 3 are from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. These case studies represent the diversity of the approaches and the diversity of values related to planning for nature-based solutions. So the first example is all around biodiversity, and as Miguel pointed out, the importance of connecting those green spaces so that we provide this holistic, mesoscale or city scale assessment of nature-based solution projects and the existing biodiversity which underpins nature-based solutions. I'll then move on to ecosystem service mapping. That's a critical element to understand what are all the benefits, both the monetary, but also other non-monetary benefits. I'll go into landscape values approaches. This is participatory mapping approaches that allow us to co-create, for example, or at least to democratize nature-based solutions. And the final example will be how we can put all this together to do some integrated decision-making for spatial planning. So next slide, please. So the first approach that I'm presenting is work. So this work, first of all, is my work as well as my team's work and the students' work as well. So some of it's been led by, a lot of it's been led by my students as well. So the first example is on ecological connectivity between urban green spaces in Kuala Lumpur. The outputs of this work was the idea was to identify urban green spaces, maps of urban green spaces, and the connections between these green spaces, and also the importance of these green spaces in terms of biodiversity provision. The methods used were what we call least cost path analysis. That's a spatial geoprocessing tool, and graph analysis. Graph analysis is a mathematical approach to identifying how the different links and the different nodes within a network of green spaces, it allows us to assess the importance of those links and nodes. And the software used for this was GraphHab. Next slide, please. So for this method, you can see at the bottom here, I guess you can't see my mouse. So at the bottom here, this is a conceptual model of what we were actually characterizing with our GIS approach. So we have patches. So these are a green infrastructure. Between these patches, there's the matrix that is the urban area, and that matrix has resistance to movement. That matrix prevents or promotes movement in terms of biodiversity movement between patches, and things, for example, such as a dual lane highway can be a barrier for movement. So for this approach, we modeled connections for a range of small and medium terrestrial and arboreal species, and they each have a range of different ecological parameters or ecological behaviors that allow them to move between patches at various distances with various kinds of land cover between them. Next slide. So this slide here shows just one example from the outputs that we produced. So first of all, what can you see there? So if you have a look, we've got these blue lines around the edges, and we can see there are two sets, polygons, two shapes. In the west, you can see there's a blue line between the west and east, and that basically means that the east of Kuala Lumpur is isolated from the west of Kuala Lumpur in terms of these medium mammals. What we can also show with these, the thickness of the lines and the size of the circles, they tell us how important the green patches are, the urban green spaces, and how important the linkages between these urban green spaces are for connecting the whole of the landscape. And basically this network of links and nodes, so the network of pathways and patches, these are the important areas which need to be preserved in terms of ensuring that we have a highly connected network of green patches, which then, of course, ensure that we can't be sure, but it's a part of understanding and ensuring that biodiversity within this urban matrix and these green spaces will remain into the future. So this is the idea of this connectivity type approach. These approaches can be combined, looking at social connectivity as well, but it's one of the first step in understanding what our urban green spaces networks look like, and connecting, hopefully, a way of thinking about how we can connect some of these small scale local projects. Thank you. So next slide, please. So the next case study is in a location in the northeast of Kuala Lumpur. So it's in a peri-urban region of Greater Kuala Lumpur. And of course, it's these regions where we're seeing the rapid urbanization occurring. And it's these regions where we really need to make the most effort in terms of protecting what green spaces are there, and being strategic around protecting which green spaces are there. So in this work, what we've developed is a spatial mapping of urban ecosystem services in order to identify where are the important ecosystems, where are the important areas of ecosystem service provision, and where are the areas where we could potentially restore or rehabilitate in order to provide ecosystem services, because in that area they are missing. And classic ecosystem services, things such as, urban heat island mitigation, and cultural ecosystem services such as green exercise, for example. So we used the Invest software produced by the Natural Capital Project from Stanford. One of my PhD students who is leading this work, one of her co-supervisors is part of that project. And the output from this work is maps of ecosystem services, quantitative maps, for example, tons of carbon sequestered, or economic valuation, for example, net present value of carbon. So in terms of the methods, Invest is a suite of models which can be used to map and value ecosystem services. These models are commonly process-based models, the types of models used, for example, by hydrologists to predict areas in the urban landscape which are likely to undergo flooding, for example. So these are physics models derived from physics understandings and equations in order to produce a range of these spatial maps. So next slide, please. So in terms of the ecosystem services we modeled for, they were heat mitigation, runoff retention, sediment retention, recreation, scenic quality, and crop production. So these represent some of the key ecosystem services in the region, which are critically important. And just on a side note, the Invest tools that we're using, they've only just developed. So the Natural Capital Group, they've only just developed and are developing more tools to support ecosystem services mapping in urban areas. And you can see at the bottom here a range of the tools that they're developing at the moment, and some which have been developed and which we're using, and some which are still in process. And one of the things to say, Invest is probably one of the most popular sort of off-the-shelf ecosystem services mapping tools out there. So next slide, please. So these maps here represent the spatial distribution of ecosystem services. So these are the outputs from InVEST in our study area. I'm just going to only briefly talk about them. So you can see each map represents a different ecosystem service. You can see the scale on the right, where which describes ecosystem service provision. So each map begins actually as a physical value. For example, in terms of crop production, you know, for every pixel, we've got a value around crop production, and heat mitigation that will be described in some form of change in temperature, for example. But we've rescaled them for the purpose of comparison. And what you can see are these green areas. These are the green areas. They represent the areas with a high ecosystem service provision, and the darker areas represent those areas with lower ecosystem service provision. So it's a bit hard to tell with these maps, but the area towards the west, those are the urban areas, and the area towards the northeast, that's the sort of peri-urban fringe. That's where we still have a lot of natural or forested or agricultural landscapes. And what we found with this mapping, for example, there are especially many urban areas where there's this incongruity in terms of the overlap, where we have urban areas separated from natural areas, and these natural areas are where we're seeing a lot of these urban ecosystem services. So these types of mapping approaches go some way into addressing what Miguel mentioned earlier in terms of, you know, the key requirement to actually, you know, quantify urban ecosystem services and their benefits, and not only the monetary benefits, but also the non-monetary benefits, things such as scenic quality, things such as recreation. And we can do a bunch of things with these data sets. This is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the analysis we've done. At the bottom, you see what we call hotspot analysis. So these are areas of localized hotspots, key, the top areas, if we think about protection. Also, we can use these maps to identify where are the areas where we need rehabilitation, areas where there's great potential for ecosystem service provision, for example. And we can overlay these to identify, you know, regional hotspots as well, where multiple ecosystem services occur. Okay, so this is just to finish up, this is our ecosystem service case study using InVEST ecosystem services modeling methods. So next slide, please. So this third case study, so this is an example of a participatory mapping approach to understanding ecosystem services. So previously what we were using biophysical models to understand, you know, what ecosystem service provision, and also understand priority biodiversity. But for this case study, what we're trying to do, we're using participatory mapping techniques. Thank you for the reminder. I think I still have 5 minutes according to my stopwatch. For this example here, we use participatory mapping techniques, and the outputs for this case study were maps of resonant landscape values, development preferences, and perceived environmental concerns. The case study was Timor Island in Malaysia. And what we did, we administered face-to-face surveys, but they can also be online, where we would bring bring paper maps to the residents, and we would ask them to identify with sticker dots the location of a range of important landscape values, development preferences, and environmental concerns. So the software for this was just paper maps digitized in ArcGIS, but also there's a fantastic tool called Maptionnaire which can be used. Next slide, please. So here are an example of the sticker dots, all the sticker dots from the 317 individuals who were surveyed. So 317 out of the total population of 3,300. You can see on the legend, we mapped 14 different kind of, value and development preference and environmental concern. There was a total of 14,000 points. Next slide, please. So we can then aggregate those point data to create point density maps of various kinds of ecosystem services. Here's some examples: aesthetic, recreation, connection to nature, spiritual values. Next slide, please. We can also identify areas of environmental concern, such as pollution levels, such as poor freshwater quality. Next slide, please. And one of the main focuses of the academic paper we looked at was also how can we support planning in terms of where we can ask the stakeholders, the people on the ground, to tell us where are their development preferences, where are the locations where they think development should or should not occur. And next slide, press the space. And these maps here, we can represent where we've identified how the preferences change between different stakeholders, where the cluster 1, they were the stakeholders which were pro-environment, and the cluster 2 represents stakeholders which were pro-development. And we can contrast, and hopefully, with this data, we can bring the communities together and discuss the very different perspectives that can exist within our communities. Next slide. So this final example is where we're bringing it all together. So I won't go into detail here, but the idea is that, all these various layers, from understanding stakeholder perspectives to understanding the biodiversity perspective to understanding where our ecosystem services values are, we want to be able to bring them together in order to make and these data sets can be part of the decision support and part of making evidence-based decisions. So next slide, please. So in terms of doing these kinds of mapping, what we need to do is not only understanding what's going on now, we need to look at what's going to happen in the future with climate change. We need to be able to model, good and bad scenarios for our urban locations. And we need to be able to trade off and understand what's being lost if we use nature-based solutions, or what's being lost if we're not conserving or protecting our natural landscapes. Next slide, please. So to conclude, there are numerous tools available which could be applied to support spatial planning for nature-based solutions. So they range from characterizing the current status. We can also assess risk in terms of risk to nature, but also we can look at the risk from hazards, for example, and integrate that with nature-based solutions. We can identify hotspots and priorities for planning, and we can characterize plausible futures with climate change, plausible futures using a nature-based solutions approach versus a plausible future without using such approach. But of course, there are numerous challenges. Miguel mentioned them. You know, the baseline fundamental data is just not available, especially in Southeast Asia, to do these things, much more readily available in Europe, for example. And there are still few examples of applications in the region in terms of the parameterization of models required. And finally, there's just a lack of expertise and there's a need for capacity building. And hopefully this need can be addressed through things such as South-to-South collaboration and North-to-South collaboration. And that's why I'm here. So let me know if you want to know more. Here's my email. Thank you. Sorry for being over time.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alex Lerner, for the presentation. It's not overtime, it's okay from us. And these are some key points of Dr.
Thank you,
Lerner's
Taylor.
presentation. Okay, these are some key points of Dr. Lerner's presentation. I will explain a little bit more in Indonesia. Jadi terdapat beragam alat atau perangkat spasial untuk mendukung perencanaan nature-based solution, misalnya permodelan konektivitas, permodelan menggunakan Invest, pemetaan partisipatif, dan perencanaan spasial terintegrasi beserta analisis skenario lainnya. Perangkat-perangkat tersebut berperan dalam menilai kondisi perkotaan terhadap perubahan iklim, baik saat ini maupun di masa depan. Akan tetapi, masih terdapat beberapa tantangan seperti kurangnya kapasitas masyarakat dan juga berbagai stakeholder yang ada di dalamnya, serta tidak tersedianya data baseline dasar, terutama di negara-negara berkembang. Dan that's all from Dr. Alex Lerner. Just for reminder, for participants who have a question to the speaker, please fill in the question via the link provided through the chat feature column in Zoom and YouTube Live. Please also address your name and your affiliation. Okay, we can move on to the next section is for the discussion. First, we will listen to the feedback about the present topics from our discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Hendrikus Andi Smeramata from Indonesia Planner Association. His areas of expertise include urban planning, coastal cities, and urban resilience. Dr. Andi, the time is yours.
Thank you, Dana. You hear my voice?
Yes, clearly.
Because signal is very low here, maybe due to the bad weather. So thank you, Miguel and Alex, for your enlightening presentation about and reminding us again about the importance of the NBS in our planning practices, and also how the raising issues regarding the implementation. So what I'm trying to respond to this conversation is based on my background and also my experience in conducting several spatial planning process, and also what we are facing as a urban and regional planners in Indonesia. So then I think it will give us some hints how then we can digest, and also we can elaborate more your findings and also your key points to Indonesian context. So let me give some just very short about the context. The first thing I think what I'm trying to highlight to this discussion, but thank you before with the RDI, my colleague Saud, for the invitation. So let me give the idea about the biodiversity hotspot. As you may know, maybe you already know, yeah, that Indonesian cities is not only develop or grow in the big island, but also in many small islands. We counted 128 urbanizing region will grow in small island and coastal area. So it is where and various of the challenges comes up because less of acknowledgement from the local stakeholder about the presence of the lowest one, for example, mangrove, and to the deepest one, coral reef, for example. How then they can optimizing the economic value of the presence of those biodiversity assets to the urban development itself. So the question that I will ask to you and also to this discussions and all other discussion and also the participant here, when we talk about NBS conception, whether we talk about nature in the built environment, so that this is mostly the major problems in big cities in Indonesia. Yeah? How do we protect our green open space? How then we can keep our river banks from the pressures of the human settlement housings and other built-up activities. So how then we can pretend or keep the natures in our built environment. But the second one, maybe this is one that I mentioned before in the very low urbanized region in many eastern zone of Indonesia. We maybe try to, let's say, understand how then we can develop buildings that harmonize with the nature environment. So those two perhaps require a different kind of recipes, like Alex mentioned before in the spatial planning. Yeah? So for the rapid urbanizing regions, maybe we can talk about how we can secure our biodiversity asset, but in the low size, or let's say low size city, we still talk how then we can develop buildings that can be friendly or that can be harmonized with the natural environment. Or the other concept, building with nature. So many urban designer, I visited the conference in Penn University last year, 2019. We talk about many urban design concepts and also methodology, like you just also present with the Invest. Yeah? So this is the kind of, then we try to provide recommendation to our city government and to our stakeholders that please also consider the solution from the nature. So we don't need to invest high cost economic infrastructure. But then the question, next question then, solution for what? I mean, for what condition and what kind of is? And then when we try to implement this kind of NBS, and then why we need this NBS and for whom, either the low income groups or the, let's say, high income also become the equal beneficiaries for this, and how. I think there are several answers we already have from your presentation, so thank you for that. But then in Indonesia, I think the most important for perhaps Saud and RDI and other other activists in NBS try to put this solution for what, whom, when, why, and how in the very easiest way, so that the public can also understand it very quickly. The second issue that I can raise from your both presentation is about how we can optimizing our biodiversity asset in Indonesia cities. So as you may see in the graphs, in the figures, we have 21 metropolitan region, 98 large cities. It means above 500,000 inhabitants, more than 100 mid-sized cities, and more than 150 small cities. So it's not easy for the national government to develop a harmonized orchestra of urban development, because we have very different, and then we have very rapid urbanization. And then most challenges now is our Java Island, I think, become the island city of Java. So in this case, then how the biodiversity asset, the landscape are still become our priority in our urban development. The third issue, this is kind of what I try to put the NDS in the metropolitan region. So in the first cycle, when this is the most basic theory, there are urbanization, suburbanization, very urban become higher, and then de-urbanization means that people come to outside of the city in the very less dense area, and then become again to the re-urbanization, so make a new kind of urbanization. But due to technology, we have 3 toll roads, we have fast industrialization, we have fast new township development, then we have also the high-speed train later on. We make conurbation. There are 2 cities, Jakarta, Bandung will become merging, and then we will face perhaps with the Hyperloop transportation later on. Perhaps Jakarta and Yogyakarta also become one mega urban region. So that's kind of the urban theory from the geographical perspective. It's an opportunity for us to also introduce the issues of we should care about the nature itself. We should care about the water surface. Now we are facing so many flooding. Yeah. So it becomes the issue. Maybe just a little evidence we can get up. There are very fast in the urbanization of Jakarta, for example. These pictures show you how then the Jakarta and Bandung with the red one will be connected so fast. We have Jatiluhur as the water reservoir, the largest one. We have also many paddy fields as our food centers. And it once again, how we can accommodate urban people with nature dominated environment. So it's still the issue. So the last one that I want to also to trigger the discussion is about when you mentioned about the planning scenario. We like the idea of the planning scenario, but at the same time, our planning law, our statutory planning law, especially after the Omnibus Law, we will have a digital spatial plan that linked to the permit system. Yeah, we call it online single submission. And then,
Dr. Andi, sorry.
Yeah.
You still have 2 minutes left.
Okay. And this issue should be be responded to how then we can improve our recommendation, because it become very rigid, yeah, because there are so many regulation that conduct. So scenario perhaps not suited to the law system. So the last one, very if you can also elaborate more on to which level of risk that the NBS still appropriate, because sometimes like Jakarta, we need a hard infrastructure solution, right? We cannot only rely on the mangrove, for example, the coastal flood. So for the Jakarta, the risk is very high. Maybe some scholars also argue that we cannot rely on the nature-based solution, but for the city, the law is perhaps it can be appropriate. So maybe it's also a good issue if you can also say something about that, to which level of risk that is still appropriate. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm waiting for the discussion with the other. Back to
Okay, thank you, Dr. Andi, for the quite interesting point. So there are some key points that has been said by Dr. Andi. The first one is, when we talk about NBS, does mean buildings in natural environment or building with nature. And the next one is solution for what, and for why we implement that, and for whom is the natural-based solution to be implemented, and how to optimize the biodiversity assets in Indonesia cities, since the condition is very different and it's easy to harmonize. It's not easy to harmonize the new concept with the current concept, and what scale the appropriate for NBS implementation in Indonesia, especially in the high density cities like Jakarta. Okay, maybe we can move on to the next discussion. Please welcome Mr. Tony Wijarsono, MRP. He's an urban planning consultant in the World Bank, who's working on NBS project implementation. Mr. Tony, the time is yours.
Thank you, Dana, and also thank you, Professor Miguel and Professor Alex. Both of you has given some really excellent presentation, which gives a lot of food for thought for me. I do have a few questions that on the implementation of NBS and how on the mainstreaming of NBS solutions, right? Of course, first of all, oh yeah, for Professor Miguel, I really like your point about your honest point about if we're going to make things closer to nature, then yeah, for sure, O&Ms are going to be costlier. It's going to be more difficult. I really like that honesty. Really appreciate that. And I think that sort of brings me to the next point. We want our NBS solutions to be cost efficient. We want our NBS solutions to be resource efficient, for sure. But I think there's a discrepancy here between when we think about the complicated O&M and the relatively complex planning procedure for NBS compared to gray infrastructure, for example. When we think about cost, right, in a project sense, we typically talk about construction cost and then O&M cost, right? And one of the main argument of NBS is that eventually it'll be more cost efficient as well as more resource efficient. But I think what stakeholders are facing on the ground are this discrepancy of understanding on the time scale of cost efficiency and resource efficiency as well, right? When a project, when academia or our policymakers think about cost efficiency, they talk about the whole life cycle of the process, right? Which when we say cost efficiency and resource efficiency, a lot of the times these comes in the form of savings, not necessarily money gained, right? Whereas in the project kind of sense, when we talk about cost efficiency, we talk about the actual construction process. So I think there needs to be a bridge that gaps that difference in understanding to sort of mainstream NBS solutions. And in that sense, yes, I mean, I noticed there's been some questions about from the participants about the quantification of benefits, which is always not the easiest thing to do with NBS, right? Some of them can be monetized, some of them cannot. But even for those that can be monetized and be measured in terms of money, and then be calculated with, as a net, using normal net present value formula, the benefits and the certainties of the certainties of those quantification methods are always being scrutinized, I would say, right? And also but that's an important factor, particularly for, I'll also be connecting to Alex as well after this. When we're doing analysis, right, we often, some of the NBS related analysis that I see are typically very small in scale. We're talking about rainwater harvesting tanks, but also some of them are also very big. We're talking about island scale big, whereas as planners, and particularly someone who's been working in the private sector previously, right? The level of analysis that we need for those kind of calculations, whether it's benefits calculation or the kind of analysis that Alex is doing, right, are typically constrained to, I'll tell you about some of the project sizes that I've been working in the past. They're like about 2 hectares, 10 hectares, 30 hectares tops, right? Not necessarily island level solution. So those kind of quantification are particularly beneficial for those that are working in that level of intervention, right? The larger scale simulations, and I'm moving on to Alex right now. The larger scale simulation is really helpful for urban designers, for example, to put their project into context. It helps them in recognizing the level of risk that their developments are facing, for sure. But in terms of their involvement, and we're talking about involving the private sector as well here, right? Their level of involvement are constrained to the area that they actually possess, to their development area, right? Those 2 hectares, 10 hectares, maybe 30 hectares, not necessarily at the municipal level, right? Those municipal level analysis are useful for policymakers and planners, but not necessarily for the private sector that often operates in a much constrained scale, right? And then there's the micro level analysis as well, like calculating volume and size, optimal sizing of rainwater harvesting tanks. That's useful for community level. But if we're talking about mainstreaming, I think we need to address all different levels of analysis, both the small scale analysis and then larger scale analysis and then middle scale analysis. And I, unfortunately, maybe it's just my lack of preference, I unfortunately haven't seen that much of mid-scale analysis packages being offered or published. There's one thing about differences in understanding the benefits there's the time scale of understanding the benefits of NBS, right? One approach is to look at the life cycle benefits, the whole life cycle benefits. The other one is looking at the project benefits. And then there's also the problem scale of analysis, that's 2. And then there's the third one is, I also like Professor Miguel's case on how he mentions about his colleague that mentions about the need for those place keepers, right? And I think that gives us a little bit of picture on how to mainstream NBS solutions, we need different levels of expertise, different levels of understanding. Of course, there's the academia that at least I consider to be kind of like offering the first level, the first layer of expertise. And then there's the professional and public officers. And then there's kind of like community levels. And these people need to, all these layers need to understand NBS up to a certain extent, and operationalizing the knowledges, the theoretical knowledges of NBS. Because if we're talking community level actors, for example, right, you're not going to be talking about some municipal level analysis, right? And I mean, there would be awareness building material. I've seen some awareness building materials for NBS that talks about kind of like the broader benefits of NBS, but those are and this are immediately follow up usually by guides, like rough guidelines on how to implement NBS. But NBS, as the pristine example, the closer to nature, and as what Professor Miguel said about the closer you get to you try to mimic nature, the more management you have to provide, basically. So when we give all those management level components that you need to manage for NBS to work, that becomes a whole lot overwhelming. That's because that's becoming overwhelming for a lot of people, particularly those that are not in the academia. So I think,
Mr. Tony, I'm so sorry. You have 2 minutes left.
oh yeah, I'm just done. Just one more sentence. So compartmentalizing those knowledges to edible chunks for depending on the audience. I think that's also going to be a key issue to mainstream NBS. And I like the OPLA example as well. But I was wondering if there's a similar sort of platform for professionals and community actors. So that's it for me. Thank you, Dan. I hope I didn't go over time too much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Tony, for the nice points. I think there's some points that will be a good point for our discussion is the cost sufficient of a natural-based solution and the complex mechanism and the stakeholders, and also about the how to elaborate the small and micro scale to the larger scale of implementing NBS, and the multiple layer of placemaker needs to understand of the operationalization of NBS. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Tony, for the wonderful comments. Now we would like to hear a brief response from the panelists to the feedback from our discussion. Maybe Dr. Alex, you can go first. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes for you.
So I'll try to keep it short, and then maybe we might be able to have some back and forth. I think both Tony and Andy made some really excellent points. They were fantastic. I love them all, and very interesting from the academic perspective. You know, I guess in a way, academics, you know, from my perspective, in terms of the modeling, we're creating these fantastic, you know, products and things like that, and we're unleashing it on the world and hoping that people will use them. But I think one of the definitely the challenge is operationalizing it and thinking about how these high-level understandings can be used in terms of the real-world solutions. And I really liked Andy's idea of solutions for what, when, why, whom, and how. I think, you know, I thought that was great. And I think Miguel said earlier, you know, that NBS is still only a recent idea. And in the context of Southeast Asia and Indonesia, I'm guessing as well, it's even more recent, you know. So I think there are huge challenges to answer the types of questions that people like Tony have in terms of, you know, show me the money, you know, you know, and this is, I'm sure this is what the developers are thinking, you know, how is tell me how the economic case for nature-based solutions. And I guess it's a challenge with any new technology demonstrating value, and I'm sure that's the same for nature-based solutions. It's like a new technology, and we have to create value. But I think also one of the challenges is if we really think about the community that's working on nature-based solutions, is probably super small. If you think about one big transport infrastructure project, that project connecting Bandung with Jakarta, that's probably made up of a massive team with, economists, planners, engineers. It's actually, at university, it's a person here doing some modeling here, a person here doing some stakeholder consultation and doing social surveys. I think one of the things, we're at the stage maybe of saying, look, I think this is a really good idea in the context of Indonesia, but we need more funding from the government. People like Tony, people like Andy need to be part of these teams, and we need to be working together in order to, we can provide the framework to start assessing these costs with interviews, in terms of interviewing the people, in terms of economic valuation, and so on. And I think that's kind of the future. I think we will at this stage, we can't answer those questions. And to finish off, because Dana will tell me off soon, and rightly so. I think I noticed I moved from Malaysia to the UK recently, and I had interesting meetings with the people at the Environmental Authority, and I was just amazed all the data they had and the level of the models, the risk analysis that was existing. So the starting point to do spatial planning in the UK, because of all that capacity, all that data was much further along. So that's why in Europe you can see these approaches being much easier to apply. So that's why it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's a challenge worth trying to address. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alex, for the feedback. And next, please, Dr. Miguel, do you have anything to say?
Yes, thank you very much to both Andy and Tony. And I think both presentations, both comments address a larger concern for our project that we're doing with Alex and Saud, in terms of thinking about nature-based solutions in terms of the development model and development problems of middle-income countries, in the sense that these are countries that are still expanding economically, demographically, and spatially, and where the infrastructure is being asked to do, the existing gray infrastructure is asked to do more and more things, whilst also have been more deficits and more gaps. So introducing nature-based solutions, green infrastructure in this context is very different from introducing it in places in Europe, for example, where those growth dynamics are not there, and where the gray infrastructure is more comprehensive, and still its limits and challenges are clear. So there's almost a double requirement for nature-based solutions in middle-income countries that I think both comments addressed. But there's also, I think that's where there is a need to rethink and adapt to local conditions. And this is where participation and inclusion are going to be key to look for alternatives to what current approaches to infrastructure and development are not doing right. So basically, just I wanted to leave it at that. And these creative approaches may also include different ways of understanding value and different ways of accounting for the benefits of nature-based solutions, and even different understandings of ecosystem services, particularly those that are cultural ecosystem services.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miguel, for the feedback. I think that's all for the first session of our discussion. So what a great discussion. I would like to say thank you for our panelists and our discussion for such an interesting point on how to implement NBS from the spatial and the management perspective. NBS is a multidisciplinary group for implementing NBS with many new assessment and adaptation in local level or in the large level in developing countries, especially in Indonesia. Or in Indonesia, NBS memang membutuhkan berbagai multidisiplin grup dan juga multidisiplin ilmu untuk menerapkan NBS dengan berbagai skenario dan analisis di negara-negara berkembang, terutama di Indonesia. Next, we will have a break for 5 or 10 minutes, so you can take a bathroom break and drink some water to keep focus on our webinar. While having a break, we will also show some educational videos related to nature-based solution. Jadi kita akan ada istirahat selama 10 menit agar bisa istirahat dan minum dan tetap fokus pada topik pada hari ini. Selagi break kita juga akan memperlihatkan beberapa video edukasi terkait nature-based solution. Saya persilahkan operator untuk menampilkan video ini. See you in 5 or 10 minutes.
Earth's climate is changing. There has been almost 1 degree Celsius of warming since pre-industrial times, and this is causing glaciers to retreat, ice caps to melt, and sea levels to rise. Moreover, there is evidence that this warming is increasing the frequency and intensity of droughts, floods, crop failures, of fires and storms right across the globe. How do we adapt to such rapid environmental change? How do we thrive in the face of these challenges? And how do we adapt and thrive in such a way that slows further change? In many parts of the world, the dominant approach to dealing with the hazards of climate change has been static engineered interventions such as sea walls, wells, and irrigation infrastructure. These can be very expensive, but very effective, at least in the short term. However, in many situations, nature can provide a more affordable long-term solution. Humans have harnessed nature to buffer the impacts of climate variability for millennia, but it is only recently that evidence and awareness has grown that the restoration and protection of nature can not only safeguard biodiversity, but also help people adapt to the effects of climate change. Moreover, by absorbing and storing carbon, these nature-based solutions can slow further warming on a global scale. So let's now take a specific example. Coastal habitats, such as coral reefs, seagrass meadows, and mangrove forests, protect coastlines from the damaging effect of wave erosion and tropical storms. They slow the intrusion of salt water that can damage crops and livestock. They safeguard biodiversity and provide a wide range of ecosystem services. In other words, they protect and support communities in the face of climate change. Moreover, healthy mangroves absorb and store large amounts of carbon. However, when these ecosystems are damaged or destroyed, for example when mangroves are converted to shrimp farms, when overfishing, boats and bleaching damages coral reefs, communities are exposed to the full fury of storms and sea level rise. They lose their property and their crops, and they have fewer natural resources to support alternative livelihoods. An engineered solution to the problem of degraded or destroyed coral reefs is to place concrete balls reinforced with microcilia in the waters to allow photosynthesis and planktonic life to regenerate in degraded areas. While effective in regulating the action of waves and reducing damage to coastlines, biological diversity is very low around concrete, and the balls do not provide any other benefits to society. The nature-based alternative is to manage and restore the ecosystem and maintain biological richness. A spawning and nursery grounds for economically important fish species. It can provide jobs and income to local economies from fishing, from recreation, and tourism. It is also a vital source of medicine and has great cultural value. And of course, the high genetic diversity it harbours gives future generations many options. Now, the restoration of coral reefs is just one example of a nature-based solution to climate change. Others include agroforestry to stabilize crop yields in drier, more variable climates, and forest restoration in river catchments to secure water supplies and protect communities from flooding, erosion, and landslides. And as with the reefs, restoring nature in this way also protects vital life support systems and slows the rate of change. It increases our well-being and makes us resilient and adaptive in a rapidly changing world. Ultimately, nature is our closest ally in the fight against the causes and the consequences of climate change, and we can only develop sustainably by taking its full value into account. So let us work together to make sure that nature is central to decision-making in business and in government for the benefit of people and planet.
Okay, thank you for the video, operator. Terima kasih. Selamat datang kembali, teman-teman, Bapak Ibu sekalian, partisipan yang saya hormati. Kita akan mulai kembali untuk presentasi yang akan dilaksanakan untuk para panelis yang ada pada hari ini. Selanjutnya saya akan memperkenalkan pembicara ketiga, yaitu Ibu Sri Handayani, ST, MT, MN. Beliau merupakan perencana muda Seksi Perencana Prasarana Kota di Dinas Tata Ruang Kota Bandung. Next, I will introduce our third speaker, namely Mrs. Yuni Sri Handayani, STMT, MN. She is a young planner at the Urban Infrastructure Planning section of Bandung City Spatial Planning. Presentasi dari Ibu Yuni berjudul Pengenalan dan Inisiasi Kebijakan Solusi Berbasis Alam Studi Kasus Kota Bandung. Ibu Yuni, apakah Anda sudah siap?
Halo, ya, saya siap.
Ya, oke Ibu Yuni, Anda memiliki waktu 20 menit untuk melakukan presentasi. Kepada Ibu Yuni, saya persilahkan.
Oke. Oke, terima kasih Mas Dana atas kesempatannya. Bapak Ibu sekalian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, good evening for Alex and Tuan Michael and also Pak tamu-tamu lainnya. Saya Yuni, seperti disebutkan sebelumnya, saya bekerja di pemerintah Kota Bandung sebagai perencana muda. I apologize for not preparing this presentation in English, so allow me to deliver in bahasa because I think it's for better understanding, especially for Indonesian audiences. Next. Inilah peta Kota Bandung. Jadi Kota Bandung ini terletak di antara Jawa Tengah, Provinsi Jawa Tengah dan juga Ibu Kota Jakarta. Next ya. terletak di daerah dataran tinggi yang kurang lebih 675 sampai dengan 1050 meter dari permukaan laut dan dikelilingi oleh jajaran pegunungan, sehingga secara geologi Kota Bandung merupakan sebuah cekungan dengan luas wilayah sekitar 16.729 hektar. Kemudian Kota Bandung dibagi menjadi 30 kecamatan dan juga 151 kelurahan dengan jumlah penduduk pada malam hari sekitar 2,49 juta jiwa dan kepadatan 148 jiwa per hektar. Tapi di siang hari itu mencapai sekitar 3,4 juta jiwa yang berasal dari komuter luar kota atau kota-kota di perbatasan di Bandung Raya. Dan laju pertumbuhan ekonomi Kota Bandung cukup positif, di atas pertumbuhan Jawa Barat dan nasional sekitar 7,21% pada tahun 2017. Next. Ada beberapa fungsi dan peran Kota Bandung, di antaranya adalah peran sebagai pemerintahan, merupakan suatu pusat kegiatan nasional dan juga pusat pemerintahan, yaitu Ibu Kota Jawa Barat. Kemudian dalam bidang pendidikan, merupakan pusat pendidikan universitas ternama di Indonesia. Ada 3 universitas negeri, yaitu ITB, Unpad, dan UPI. Kemudian tersebar juga beberapa banyak universitas swasta. Kemudian juga ada pusat R&D, Research and Development, ada LIPI, ada Pindad, ada PTDI, dan sebagainya. Dan kemudian adalah fungsi dan peran sebagai pusat komersil, yaitu pedagang wisata, perdagangan dan jasa, serta pusat kegiatan wisata. Hal ini simpulkan bahwa Kota Bandung mempunyai fungsi dan peran itu sebagai tujuan migrasi penduduk dan juga pusat investasi pembangunan. Next. Kita lihat perkembangan Kota Bandung dari tahun ke tahun. Sebelumnya pada tahun 48, luas Kota Bandung hanya sekitar 8.908 hektar, dan di tahun 87 mencapai 16.729 hektar. Pertambahan penduduk Kota Bandung ini terutama dalam sektor sekunder dan tersier, tadi disebutkan sebagai pusat perdagangan dan jasa. Kemudian trennya menunjukkan peningkatan, itu salah satunya pedagang jasa tadi, dan juga perumahan untuk mensupportnya, dan juga terjadi penurunan di kawasan non terbangun, terlihat di dalam gambarnya ya, kontribusi kawasan terbangun dan non terbangun, di mana kawasan terbangun semakin banyak besar, ya semakin tinggi, sekitar 82% di tahun 2016. Next. Kalau kita lihat perkembangan tutupan lahan, kita melihat bahwa perkembangan Kota Bandung itu menuju ke arah timur Kota Bandung, di mana wilayah-wilayah seperti Ujung Berung dan Gede Bage. Untuk Gede Bage ini sendiri sejalan dengan apa yang sudah ditetapkan di dalam dokumen tata ruang kami, yaitu di RT RW sebagai pusat pertumbuhan primer kedua Kota Bandung. Yang pertama ada di alun-alun di Kota Lama, dan kemudian yang kedua diharapkan terjadi perkembangan di daerah Gede Bage atau daerah timur Kota Bandung. Next. Untuk aspek sosial kependudukan, jumlah penduduk Kota Bandung sekitar 2,4 juta jiwa, di antaranya dengan proporsi hampir seimbang antara jumlah penduduk laki-laki dan juga perempuan, dengan sebaran penduduk terpadat di kecamatan di daerah barat ya, daerah barat Bandung, yaitu di Kecamatan Bojong Loa Kaler dan Kecamatan Babakan Ciparai. Ini bisa dipahami mengingat memang asal muasal Kota Bandung itu adalah di daerah barat. Next. Oke. Untuk skenario estimasi jumlah dan distribusi penduduk, diharapkan ke depannya distribusi penduduk cukup merata ya, tidak hanya bermukim di daerah barat atau di Kota Lama, tetapi juga mengarah ke daerah timur seperti ini. Next. dalam bidang perekonomian, PDRB Kota Bandung dari tahun 2013 sampai 2017 juga mengalami peningkatannya tiap tahun dengan kontribusi sektor ekonomi ya di sektor sekunder dan juga tersier, yaitu kontribusi tertinggi di bidang perdagangan besar dan eceran, reparasi mobil dan juga sepeda motor. Next. Ini yang menjadi isu-isu strategis penataan ruang dan lingkungan di Kota Bandung. Saya rasa sebenarnya hampir tiap kota ini sepertinya masalah umum ya di hampir setiap kota. Isu-isu strategis ini satu sama lain saling berkaitan. Sebagai contoh, penyebaran sungai di sini berkaitan dengan penurunan kualitas air. Kemudian juga berhubungan dengan persampahan dan juga akhirnya mengakibatkan banjir atau genangan. Kemudian isu-isu strategis terkait alih fungsi lahan itu sangat berkaitan dengan kurangnya ruang terbuka hijau, itu karena sangat tingginya wilayah terbangun. Kemudian juga tadi terkait permasalahan pelanggaran tata ruang, adanya illegal settlement, kemudian ada pelanggaran ketentuan perizinan dan sebagainya. Dan ini juga kemudian memberikan kontribusi terhadap permasalahan banjir atau genangan di Kota Bandung. Next. Ini merupakan data pelanggaran tata ruang dan bangunan di Kota Bandung dari tahun 2020 sampai 2021, menunjukkan ada peningkatan pelanggaran tata ruang. Biasanya informasi pelanggaran tata ruang dan bangunan ini kami peroleh melalui pelaporan dan juga monitoring dari koordinator wilayah dan juga dari kantor pusat, yang kemudian kami tindak lanjuti pertama dengan melakukan identifikasi, kemudian melakukan klarifikasi, dan kemudian dilakukan tindakan seperti terlihat di gambar berikut. Next. Terkait permasalahan persampahan, timbulan dan komposisi sampah di Kota Bandung ini dari tahun 2017 hingga tahun 2019 didominasi oleh sampah domestik, ya, sampah domestik dengan komposisi sampah utama berupa sampah makanan, minuman dan daun, makanan dan daun, kemudian disusul sampah kertas dan karton dan juga plastik. Next. Untuk isu ruang terbuka hijau, dalam pengembangan RTH yang termuat dalam Perda RT/RW Kota Bandung tahun nomor 18 tahun 2011, kita sudah mengidentifikasi beberapa potensi. Terus kita sudah menggali beberapa potensi. Namun demikian dalam kondisi existing sangat sulit untuk diimplementasikan, mengingat kondisi Kota Bandung yang sudah sangat padat dan juga sekitar 80% sudah terbangun seperti itu. Namun demikian pada tahun 2019 itu terdapat beberapa penambahan dari utamanya dari pihak ketiga atau developer, kontribusi untuk pembangunan taman, perumahan dan juga lahan makam. Next. Oke. Untuk isu banjir, utamanya disebabkan oleh curah hujan yang ekstrim, ya. Ada 3 daerah yang kita indikasi daerah yang cukup parah, yaitu daerah Pagarsih, kemudian Pasteur dan juga Gede Bage. Memang kejadian banjir ini biasanya terjadi pada puncak-puncak musim hujan, di mana intensitas curah hujan sangat tinggi, yaitu pada bulan November sampai Januari. Next. Oke. Nah, saya ingin memperkenalkan sedikit tentang kebijakan di Kota Bandung yang sangat terkait dalam penanganan isu-isu permasalahan penataan ruang dan juga lingkungan tadi. Yang pertama adalah rencana tata ruang wilayah Kota Bandung yang saat ini kita sedang melakukan evaluasi, ya, di mana di dalam RT/RW itu terdapat struktur ruang dan arahan pola ruang, kemudian rencana detail tata ruang dan juga peraturan zonasi, di mana di dalamnya terdapat perbentukan intensitas pemanfaatan ruang, dan yang kemudian kami tuangkan ke dalam satu sistem informasi tata ruang atau kami sebut sebagai Citarum, dan juga kebijakan-kebijakan kota lainnya yang mendukung seperti kebijakan pengelolaan sampah, kemudian perda bangunan hijau dan sebagainya. Next. Kita lihat di sini bahwa ini merupakan substansi pokok per sub RT/RW. Dalam hal ini kita lihat bahwa RTH dan mitigasi bencana itu merupakan salah dua dari porsi terbesar yang sangat penting dikaji dalam studi substansi RT/RW. Oleh karena itu, kami meyakini bahwa dokumen rencana tata ruang ini bisa menjadi support dalam upaya penanganan permasalahan lingkungan di Kota Bandung. Next. Ini merupakan peta rencana pola ruang EDTR dan peraturan zonasi di Kota Bandung. Kalau lihat di sini ada berbagai zona, ya, yaitu zona lindung dan budidaya dengan berbagai subzona. Next. Ya, dengan berbagai subzona berikut, ya. Nah, khusus untuk Kota Bandung kami punya salah satu zona khusus, yaitu adalah zona KBU atau kawasan Bandung Utara, di mana kawasan Bandung Utara ini merupakan kawasan yang terletak di atas ketinggian 750 meter dari permukaan laut, sehingga perlu pengendalian penguasaan ruang terkait dengan tadi permasalahan lingkungan, dan juga KBU ini tidak hanya menjadi masalah Kota Bandung, tetapi juga menjadi isu regional, karena memang beberapa kota kabupaten di Bandung Raya itu memiliki wilayah di kawasan Bandung Utara juga. Next. Nah, berikut merupakan sistem informasi tata ruang Citarum yang kami buat untuk mempermudah pelayanan, terutama pelayanan informasi rencana kota kepada masyarakat, sehingga kami tidak harus membuka buku dokumen itu, tetapi kami menggunakan sistem informasi yang lebih lebih mudah lah gitu. Di sini terlihat ada titik yang hitam seperti ini. Ini merupakan wilayah Gede Bage, wilayah di paling ujung timur itu. Nah, saya gunakan sebagai contoh, ada zona campuran, kemudian subzona campuran intensitas tinggi, kemudian ada juga teknik pengaturan zonasi di sini. Nah, kalau di sini untuk wilayah Gede Bage itu ada teknik pengaturan zonasi bonus, yaitu pemohon yang mengajukan pengembangan pemanfaatan ruang di kawasan ini berhak untuk mengajukan pelampauan KL KLB dengan kontribusi tertentu. Ini kemudian adalah intensitas pemanfaatan ruangnya dengan berdasarkan fungsi jalannya. Kalau di sini contohnya adalah fungsi jalan kolektor, di mana koefisien dasar bangunannya maksimum 65%, KLB 6,5, dan juga KDH minimumnya 30%. Next. Oke, kita beralih ke strategi penanganan permasalahan lingkungan di Kota Bandung. Ada beberapa strategi. Yang pertama itu adalah pemeliharaan drainase kota yang dimaksudkan untuk melancarkan aliran air drainase kota, karena kita tahu sendiri bahwa tadi permasalahan banjir itu salah satunya disebabkan oleh adanya sampah di dalam drainase kota. Kemudian yang kedua, melakukan normalisasi sungai, yaitu pengurukan sampah-sampah yang ada di sungai. Tujuannya sama untuk melancarkan aliran pada saluran drainase primer. Kemudian revitalisasi kualitas air melalui penuangan ekoenzim. Jadi ekoenzim ini merupakan fermentasi dari sayur dan buah yang diproduksi oleh DPU Kota Bandung sendiri, kemudian juga bekerja sama dengan akademisi, yaitu Universitas Pajajaran, jurusan mikrobiologi. Kemudian sumber resapan berupa drempori juga dilakukan di beberapa jalan di Kota Bandung, dan juga penanganan lahan kritis yang bekerja sama dengan pemerintah Provinsi Jawa Barat. Next. Nah, ini merupakan contoh upaya penanganan banjir. Ada sekitar 68 lokasi seperti yang saya sebutkan. Saya hanya meng-capture sekitar 21 lokasi yang diantaranya tadi terdapat Pasteur, kemudian Pagarsi, dan juga daerah Gede Bage ya. Ya, pada
ini
ya.
Tinggal 2 menit lagi.
Oke. Saya percepat. Upaya terbanyak melalui pengerukan sungai. Next. Ya, ini kebutuhan sarana prasarana untuk penanganan banjir sampai tahun 2022. Next. Nah, ini merupakan strategi pengelolaan persampahan. Kita dulunya melakukan hanya kumpul angkut buang, dan kita sekarang ada program Kang Pisman, kurangi, pisahkan, manfaatkan. Next. Di dalam program Kang Pisman ini yang sudah dilakukan sejak tanggal 17 Oktober 2018, itu ada beberapa kegiatan di beberapa lokasi, bahkan di lingkungan pemerintah sendiri kami dari masing-masing dinas juga ada gerakan bank sampah. Next. Nah, ini ada kemajuan dari program Kang Pisman. Memang tidak secara signifikan ya, tetapi menunjukkan tren positif, sehingga diperlukan pelibatan akademisi untuk mencari pendekatan yang baik-baik untuk meningkatkan kinerja yang lebih optimal. Next. Ya, ini merupakan apresiasi ya dari untuk kegiatan Kang Pisman. Ada aktivis lingkungan dari Amerika, Paul Connett, yang memberikan apresiasi kepada Wali Kota Kota Bandung sebagai penggagas program Kang Pisman. Next. Ya, demikian presentasi yang bisa saya sampaikan. Kurang lebihnya saya mohon maaf. Terima kasih. Sekian. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih atas presentasinya, Bu Yuni. Sangat menarik sekali presentasinya terkait dengan perspektif dari pemerintah Kota Bandung sendiri. As Bu Yuni said, Bandung City has various roles that encourage rapid development. However, a series of strategic issues related to environment emerge, such as river pollution, lack of green open space, and a solid waste problem, and many others. To overcome this, the government of Bandung has launched several management strategies, including normalizing rivers, revitalizing water quality using eco enzymes, and handling critical lands. There is also a paradigm shift in solid waste from collect transport waste to the reduce separate use. And that's it from Buyani. Uh, just for reminder for participants who have a question to the speaker, please fill in the question via the link provided through the chat feature column on Zoom and YouTube Live. And we can move on to the next presenter. Saya akan memperkenalkan pembicara terakhir pada hari ini. Beliau adalah Dr. Saud Aritua Hasiolan Sagala STMSC. Beliau merupakan peneliti dan dosen di Departemen Perencanaan Wilayah Kota ITB dan juga merupakan cluster chair dari Disaster and Climate Resilience di RDI. Presentasi Dr. Saud Sagala sendiri berjudul Scaling Up Nature-Based Solution and Speeding Up Its Action Through Local-Based Strategy, Case Study Bandung City Indonesia, atau in bahasa meningkatkan implementasi nature-based solution melalui strategi berbasis lokal. Pak Saud, apakah sudah siap, Pak?
Sudah, selamat sore, good afternoon. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well. Pak Saud, you have 20 minutes. The time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Dana, for nice moderation and also for the previous participants and also discussions. For me, this is always a challenge being a last speaker, but also there is opportunity because it can connect with what the previous speakers have mentioned. And I would like to share collaborative research that we have done related to the nature-based solutions on the scale up and the speed up its action in the case of Bandung. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about 2 points here. There are 3 points, but the 2 points that I would like to mention is the 2 points on the right-hand side. It's about the NBS pre-implementation framework, which is on the considerations needed for planning nature-based solutions, so learning from the existing program and the gap in the knowledge, as well as related to the response to flood risk reduction program in Bandung City. Some of these already mentioned by Ibu Yuni, thanks to Ibu Yuni earlier. Next slide, please. Yeah, quick introduction. I will not spend a lot of time. It was already explained very nicely by Ibu Yuni with the strategy as well as the statistic, the numbers related to Bandung. But to emphasize again to our audience here that growing city or big city like Bandung has bring a lot of land use conversion, and it is also bringing pressure in terms of the use of resources such as water and also the increasing build-up area, and thus the water catchment area has been reduced, and in fact a lot of flooding has occurred in the city, and also as pointed out by Bu Yuni related to the rainfall extreme conditions related to climate change and so on that may affect Bandung. Next slide, please. So from this slide, I will talk quickly or briefly about the flood risk reductions in Bandung City. Next. This has been shown, but I would like to highlight that despite flooding that we have in Bandung for the past, I would say more and more frequently in the past 10 to 15 years, that a number of measures have been done, including the increasing the drainage capacity, the channels, number of flood control infrastructures, and so on. And then there's also integration between gray and green infrastructures. So the emphasis is on infrastructure. Next. In the lower part of Bandung, there has been also construction of retention pond. In addition to that, there are rain barrel installation, as you can see from some figure here, Biofor, and then river normalization. Again, this type of construction comes with the infrastructures, and some citizen initiatives such as by Tunas Nusa community. I showed it also in the previous webinar 2 weeks ago, but nevertheless, the initiatives are still focusing on structural measures, increasing the capacity of the, let's say, the water to channel, but less into the bringing the water into the, into the city rather than draining the water. Next. So because of a number of measures that have been done, there are still limitations and challenges in response to flood risk reduction in Bandung, particularly in the context of nature-based solutions. My colleagues previously showed the case of the idea in Europe, in the Netherlands, for example, and also in Kuala Lumpur about how the nature-based solutions were being, growing from time to time, and also how this has been used globally. But we also have still face the difficulties, limitation, and challenges. And it is interesting to hear about the survey conducted earlier in this seminar. Then Dana showed earlier that some participants commented that there is a financing issue, and especially this is true in fast-growing city like Bandung, where budget for land provisions and providing NBS would be a problem. And this is something that connected also with what Miguel earlier mentioned about how to consider NBS that is realistic and also including consideration of the financing sources. The second part would be regulations, and this is something that is clear that in some regulations how to connect with the idea of bringing more conservation, nature issues into the city. Next. Despite the challenges, so please move the next slide. Yeah. Despite the challenges, and then please one more. Yeah. Okay. I will start with the middle slide here. That myself from academic and some colleagues also here. But other than that, actually, we have also community growing more concern about nature-based solutions. We know about some initiatives at local level, some private or persons also concerned on this. And I know more and more people working on ecology, ecosystem, disaster risk reduction, and also green and environment communities. And also, for example, like Tony earlier also mentioned in the discussions. And there is also opportunity from the local characteristic. This is in line with what Miguel and Alex presented earlier, as well as Bu Yuni, on how to incorporate the public, community, and also stakeholder participation. And there is interest, and I enjoy discussion with the Dinas Penataan Ruang, for example, the spatial planning agency, that it is actually possible to consider how through the spatial planning documents we can include on the physical analysis as well as the consideration about nature in that. And in Indonesia, we have opportunity through, because each 5 years we have review for it's mandatory by regulation to also review the spatial planning, that nature-based solutions can be considered in the spatial planning document, especially giving the concern that we are now facing more and more disasters. Next. Yeah, this is about the nature-based solution pre-implementation framework. Next slide. So the first part of the framework would include the integrated policy support. I'm starting with the right-hand side here. So how to bring nature-based solution, into policies and city planning. So we can synergize the nature-based solutions into policies and city planning, as I said earlier, through spatial planning, for example. And this synergy might also reduce the flood risk reduction and also bringing the urban resilience And then to conduct this, we can connect with the practical operation of guidelines, which will shape the actors, the behaviors, so the possibility to later on, for example, incentive and disincentive, and also to upscaling the nature-based solution benefits to the local level. I remember 2 weeks ago we discussed that nature-based solution is not only green infrastructures but also bringing biodiversity and also opportunity of economy to the community. And on the left-hand side, we can see that we still have the challenge, as I showed earlier, how the programs sometimes are integrated and less association with flood risk management, climate change adaptation, as well as some cross-level regulations. Next slide. The second one on the framework is on the scale and functionality. This was discussed interestingly in about the case of Kuala Lumpur and also Bandung that I showed earlier in the first webinar. There was a question by one of the participants, I think, on how to bring the scale into, let's say, neighborhood or community level, which I mentioned that Indonesia nationwide has some programs, some urban upgrading programs such as Kotaku. Tony, myself also are involved in that technical support. But the idea is indeed to start from small scale and bringing that into the city scale. And this is the challenge, as shown also by Kuala Lumpur case. But there is opportunity because we can connect with the special planning at the in the larger context. And most flooding events that occur in Bandung is due to the high precipitation that is combined with low drainability. So common interventions still on the the infrastructures as I mentioned earlier, but let's consider about reducing the runoff rather than also widening the drainage. Next slide. Again, on the scale and functionality must not be separated. So combining these two can influence the creation of more and more creative nature-based solution intervention at any scale. And this also involve starting from your very own yard, your what is so-called rain garden, perhaps, and also what is in front of your home or schools, public facilities, as well as government-owned, let's say, projects that can consider the urban strategic plan and goals, including the how NBS function there, and all through these layers would really contribute to the nature-based solution. So again, seeing from the very large scale, the details, and also smaller scale but wider area. Next. Space is the third one on the framework, and this was also mentioned by previous speakers very clearly. Presentation by Bu Yuni about the spatial planning would relate to this. And in the previous Menti survey, it was also some participants mentioned about the land provisions, the land use planning, and also the ownership. And this is the challenge that we have. But we might also consider about, okay, private, nature-based solution at the private yard, private-owned, land, for example. That's also possible. That is endorsed through regulation or let's say guideline. Next slide, please. And integration with spatial planning would be important to accommodate the agreement between the private landowner, private land on land that can be used for nature-based solutions, and how the small and large scale individual and communal can work together. The fourth one would be on collaboration. When we are talking about nature-based solutions, space, scale, and the regulation, it involves a number of stakeholders. On the right-hand side here, there is a very basic way of understanding about stakeholders. There should be more and more complex, more than the example that is shown here. But we can see it from the government perspective, private sectors, the NGOs, university, research institutions, businesses, as well as others that are part of the city. That when we talk about budget can also be supported or also contribute into the fundraising for the nature-based solutions if they are being informed well into the benefit of these nature-based solutions. Next one. Collaboration, yeah, is not only important to familiarize the public towards nature-based solution concepts, but also bringing the ownership, bringing the movement, bringing the implementation into reality. Next one. The fifth of the framework would be the public knowledge transfer. So obviously we understand that nature-based solution is a concept. There is technology in there. There is technical analysis where it needs to have bringing the awareness from low awareness to solutions, and then from public transfer to effective and efficient nature-based solutions. So it involves also in the collaboration of the public, not only from government but also different stakeholders into this. And for this, there has to be awareness raising and so on. Next slide. How can we do this? Increasing that through the socialization and training. It's clear what we are doing now. It's one of that kind of engagement. And also RDI is trying to build more and more research on this. Last week we had more from the academicians, so the network with academicians would be important in such development of concept, but not only stopping that, but also including the community, the other stakeholders as well as government. That's why we have also Bu Yuni in this meeting to bring the idea of collaboration across stakeholders. And when we talk about movement, government have also in Bandung started a number of activity that includes a million biofors, and also a number of examples that was shown earlier by the previous speaker. Okay, next slide. Yeah, please next until it's all complete. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will not go into the details all of this, but this summarize what is needed in the implementation of nature-based solutions. So the five one, the integrated policy support, scale and functionality, spatial collaboration, and public knowledge transfer through mainstreaming and nature-based solutions, through ensuring effectiveness of implementation, identifying type of risk and scale, gathering different resource skills and knowledge, as well as inclusive involvement. And next slide. This is the conclusion. So we know it's clear cities in Indonesia, including Bandung, faces problems in the urban land conversion. I think the example is quite common, that leading to flooding and environmental problems, including the garbage collection and so on, that also affecting the flooding and the environmental quality. The current responses through the structural measures have been partially solving the problem, but yet there are still limitations and challenges. On this, we believe that the nature-based solution concept can play important role to implement NBS. The 5 NBS pre-implementation framework that we showed earlier would be needed. The integrated policy support, scale functionality, spatial collaboration, as well as the public knowledge transfer. Next slide. Yeah, with this, I would like to end my presentation, and thank you again to our collaborator in this research from RDI, from Sheffield, from Lincoln, from Dinas Penata Kota Bandung, ITB, and all the participants. And let's hope to bring the nature-based solutions into a positive movement for urban resilience. Thank you. Over to you, moderator, to Dana.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Saud atas presentasinya. Jadi ada beberapa hal yang cukup menarik untuk kita highlight pada kesempatan kali ini, di mana peningkatan potensi banjir di Kota Bandung telah banyak mendorong adanya langkah-langkah preventif dari pemerintah. Dan ada beberapa juga elemen masyarakat yang membantu untuk preventif tersebut, yang pada esensinya dapat dikategorikan sebagai NBS. Kendati demikian, sejauh ini memang belum ditemui bahwa berbagai macam permasalahan fundamental yang menghambat pelaksanaan inisiatif-inisiatif tersebut. Berkaca dari ini, dapat dirumuskan sebuah kerangka preimplementasi NBS yang dibentuk dengan mengidentifikasi berbagai keterbatasan, tantangan, serta peluang yang ada. Itu tadi ada 5 komponen utama, dan itu akan dapat sangat membantu untuk pelaksanaan Naturbi Solution secara optimal di Kota Bandung. Oke, kita akan masuk ke sesi selanjutnya, yaitu sesi dari diskusan kita. Please welcome Bapak Tony Wijarsono MRP untuk memberikan beberapa masukan terkait presentasi dari Bu Yuni dan juga Dr. Saud Sagara. Silakan Pak Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. Thank you as well for Pak Saud and also Bu Yuni. I mean, I used to live and study in Bandung, but it's been a while since the last time I went there, and I honestly cannot say that I'm familiar with the current situations, current trends, current development trends that is happening in Bandung right now. And Bu Yuni's presentation has done a great job to bring me up to speed on this. But I'm curious though, I mean, and this is one topic that has been mentioned both by Pak Saud and also Ibu Yuni, I think. But in terms of NBS implementation, one of the challenges is of course, the acquisition of land, not land acquisition, but the procurement of land to accommodate for medium to larger scale NBS infrastructure, NBS solutions, right? And Pak Saud had mentioned as well that in one of his aspects, one of his frameworks, one topic that was discussed was land consolidation, right? Land consolidation is, I think, I personally think that is a great idea. I mean, you could reduce the current pace, the built-up area growth by consolidating all those needs, and therefore still accommodating the urban population growth, and yet still making up, still allocate additional spaces, free up additional spaces that you could potentially use for NBS solutions. So one of my questions that I was looking at Ibu Yuni's presentation before is that, and I noticed that the FAR, KLB, was relatively low for a city as dense as Bandung with 2.5 million population. I believe it was somewhere around 3.5 FAR, right? And I think that could potentially be a restriction for the effectiveness of land consolidation. So that's one point. I mean, there could be a little bit more discussion as to why the FAR is limited up to that extent in Bandung. What are the challenges in increasing that? Because adding those, I believe, could potentially help out in land consolidation. Maybe. That's one. And two, it's always excellent to see the commendable efforts that the government has put down, and the building of additional drainages, building of retention ponds, all excellent efforts. But I was wondering, because NBS requires intersectoral coordination, right? Seems to have been brought up by the spatial planning as well as the by the Public Works Agency. But I was wondering if the current engagement level of the environmental agency, as well as the other, maybe PLN or maybe PDAM, because a lot of those agencies are going to be involved in the measuring of the performance at the NBS, right? The idea of having a NBS solution is that we can conserve water, we can conserve energy. That's one of the arguments that is often posed in NBS implementation, right? So those additional sectors, how are the engagement happening across those sectors? And I believe that's two of my main points. Yeah, challenges to land consolidation and how FAR relates to that, the current FAR policy relates to that? Would it be possible maybe with the current FARW, the current spatial plan, to direct development in the middle, into the major urban areas, encourage more growth in that area and maybe restrict growth in the peri-urban areas? Is that something that is in the pipeline for the city of Bandung, for the government of Bandung? Is that something that is currently being thought about? And number two is, of course, the state of intersectoral coordination engagement, both maybe at the academic as well as the public sector as well. So I think that addresses my two main comments. I mean, if there could be more discussion on those two topics, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Tony atas feedback-nya. Mungkin kita bisa lanjut dulu ke Dr. Andi. Dr. Andi, silakan. Halo, Dr. Andi. Oke, mungkin Dr. Andi sedang ada permasalahan dengan sinyalnya, jadi mungkin kita bisa lanjut dulu terkait dengan tanggapan dari Dr. Saud Sagala terlebih dahulu. Mungkin silakan Pak Saud jika ada tanggapan terkait dengan opini dari Pak Tony, silakan.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Tony. I know you also had a chance of living in Bandung, right? So you witness how things change, and also the growing of the city itself. I leave some of the comments later to Bu Yuni, because I think some of them related to the planning of the government and regulations. But I do agree on the land, or let's say you highlighted the importance of land here in such a big city like Bandung would require a lot of I would say open space. By regulations, we know that government have allocated some maybe around 25-30% of the open space, although I don't remember the details what we have in Bandung, for example. But this is the challenge, not only in Bandung but also all over Indonesia. I see this as a very important challenge that needs to be discussed. But this is also down to our way of development and regulations related to the land ownership in Indonesia. So one way that I can say or maybe offer is to connect with the private development. And we know that some large-scale development owned by private taking place in Bandung, in other places of Indonesia. So government can bring such regulation, guidelines, and perhaps advocacy. Because then, for example, imagine that your estate can claim that sustainability and also environmental friendly concern would be part of the estate development. I think the value will also increase, as well as contributing to the sustainable development itself. Second, related to the FAR, I would think that this is a very important one, but this require also monitoring very tight by the government. And in current state, I think it's not easy to implement, but perhaps with the combination of the IT technology, monitoring would be possible in the future. But rather than that, I think a quick win perhaps also again to bring examples, provide some evidence, because communities also need evidence. With such evidence, they will come with okay, I can adopt and so on. And we know some Indonesian also like to follow what others have done. We know during this lockdown, for example, some people started to grow plants, using their time, and then others started to follow. And we know that this is also becoming a trend. So why not the growing the plants, also including the nature-based solutions idea, right? So bringing that, I think, would be one way. And quote by quote, we are doing that through meetings like this, through sharing through social medias and so on. It will be also affecting. I think that's one way, and we fully support the government of Bandung, for example, Bu Yuni and colleagues on this process. But from academician point of view, I think we can provide with concepts, but implementation would need government, public, private to collaborate together. I think that would be my quick one. But one thing that I would like to highlight a little bit later, also to Alex and also Miguel, what is the cost of NBS? I think this is something that struck me, because we have been discussing about this, and I would like to hear about that a bit later before I think I stop myself here now. Okay, over Dana.
Oke, thank you Pak Saud atas tanggapannya. Mungkin selanjutnya dari Bu Yuni, silakan Bu Yuni jika ada tanggapan terkait feedback dari Pak Tony.
Oke. Oke, terima kasih Pak Tony atas feedback ya. Terkait tadi sedikit konfirmasi untuk yang jumlah penduduk ya. Jadi kalau tadi mengira itu jumlah penduduk sekarang sudah mencapai sekitar lebih dari 3,5 juta. Saya rasa bisa kemungkinan seperti itu Pak, karena data yang saya ambil tadi sekitar data tahun data tahun 2017 ya. Jadi dengan sangat tingginya dinamika pembangunan di Kota Bandung, saya rasa terjadi peningkatan yang sangat signifikan terhadap pertumbuhan penduduk di Kota Bandung pula. Itu komentar yang pertama. Kemudian terkait apa yang menjadi tantangan, kalau tidak saya salah mendeskripsikannya, tantangan untuk masalah, begitu Pak Tony? Tantangan untuk masalah dan konsolidasi di Kota Bandung, berarti ini terkait dengan, maaf, bisa didengar nggak? Putus-putus ya? Putus ya? Halo? Bisa didengar?
Sedikit terputus-putus Ibu Yuni ya? Dari saya sendiri.
Sorry. Ya, sorry. Mungkin semakin sore koneksinya kurang bagus.
Tapi iya, tadi pertanyaan tentang tantangan
konsolidasi lahan.
Konsolidasi lahan dan KLB, betul ya.
Sorry. Halo?
Ya Bu Yuni, suaranya terdengar?
Suaranya terdengar nggak?
Terdengar Bu, terdengar.
Oke, sorry. Jadi seperti kita ketahui di Kota Bandung itu ada beberapa tantangan yang dihadapi terkait konsolidasi lahan tadi ya. Yang pertama adalah terkait permasalahan konsolidasi lahan itu adalah masalahnya di lahan itu sendiri. Jadi banyak sekali lahan di Kota Bandung itu yang di mana lahan-lahan terutama yang dihuni oleh atau adanya perumahan kumuh itu sendiri merupakan lahan-lahan pribadi atau hak milik, dan sedikit lahan milik pemerintah. Jadi sangat terbatas lahan milik pemerintah Kota Bandung sendiri, sehingga pemerintah untuk bisa melakukan treatment terhadap kawasan itu ya sangat sulit gitu ya. Karena memang kemudian yang kedua, bahkan lahan milik pemerintah sendiri yang sudah terbatas itu seringkali juga merupakan lahan-lahan yang sudah dihuni oleh masyarakat baik secara legal maupun ilegal seperti itu, dan mereka sudah bertahun-tahun menghuni merasa sebagai tanah milik sendiri. Nah, itu sangat kental permasalahan sosial dalam namun demikian sebelumnya pernah ada penelitian dari ITB oleh Prof. Haryo itu terkait land konsolidasi di lahan privat. Sehingga tidak hanya merevitalisasi kawasan kumuh itu sendiri, tetapi semua aktivitas yang pernah dilakukan di situ itu masih tetap bisa dilakukan oleh penghuni setempat gitu, dengan memberikan hak usaha di situ. Jadi membangunkan satu hak usaha atau bangunan usaha yang bisa digunakan oleh penghuni atau penduduk di kawasan tersebut dengan perhitungan tertentu. Terutama artinya memang kita butuh jadi alternatif untuk bisa mengeksekusi khususnya dalam rangka merevitalisasi kawasan kumuh gitu. Kemudian permasalahan yang kedua itu terkait pengawasan. Jadi pengawasan pemanfaatan ruang. Ya, jadi memang kita tahu sendiri bahwa 8% daerah Kota Bandung merupakan daerah yang sudah terbangun, sedangkan kami dari Dinas Pengawasan itu sangat sedikit ya sumber dayanya seperti itu. Jadi hanya sebagai bagian dari satu institusi gitu, bagi bagian kecil dari satu bidang itu yang mengurusi satu kota. Kemudian dinamika pembangunan yang sangat tinggi itu juga sedikit sedikit banyak sangat mempengaruhi kinerja juga gitu. Otomatis walaupun sudah kita lakukan semaksimal mungkin, tetapi sangat sulit itu. Makanya kita pun dalam pengawasan ini juga membutuhkan kontribusi dari masyarakat itu tadi melalui pelaporan atau yang sifatnya reaktif gitu dari masyarakat gitu. Jadi masyarakat aware pada lingkungan sekitarnya karena memang dampak-dampak tadi yang akan merasakan itu masyarakat itu sendiri. Kemudian untuk tantangan yang ketiga ya saya rasa ini mungkin klise ya bagi semua pemerintah anggaran ya. Jadi anggaran itu sangat untuk pemerintah itu memang sangat terbatas ya dikarenakan memang kami memiliki banyak prioritas gitu. Jadi terkait tadi permasalahan penanganan kawasan kumuh ya terkait dengan konsolidasi ini juga membutuhkan investasi yang sangat besar gitu, sehingga tidak memungkinkan kami itu untuk menarik investor gitu yang bersedia untuk bekerja sama gitu. Bahkan dari Kementerian PUPR pun sebenarnya sudah sudah memberikan semacam kontribusi gitu. Tetapi memang ada kebijakan-kebijakan yang seringkali susah untuk diimplementasikan di daerah seperti itu. Kemudian adanya kebijakan insentif yang juga kami gunakan untuk bisa mengoptimalkan dalam penanganan permasalahan terutama tata ruang ya. Dalam hal ini mungkin di Staru khususnya itu lebih banyak di dalam hal terkait penanganan pemanfaatan ruang. Jadi kalau untuk lingkungan memang kami multi sektor. Tadi seperti disebutkan Pak Dana bahwa untuk kegiatan NBS ini itu pada dasarnya itu kegiatan bersama satu Kota Bandung. Makanya tadi data yang saya sampaikan juga dari beberapa institusi lain seperti DLHK, kemudian dari DPKP 3 dan juga dari PU itu sendiri. Bahkan dari Wistaru sebenarnya bukan eksekutornya, kami hanya semacam kebijakan, beri kebijakan saja, eksekutor dari dinas lainnya. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya sampaikan, Tony. Kurang lebihnya mohon maaf. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Bu Yuni atas tanggapannya. Mungkin yang perlu di-highlight itu sendiri seperti permasalahan-permasalahan di Kota Bandung itu terkait dengan lahan milik pemerintah yang terbatas, lalu juga pengawasan penataan ruang yang masih perlu ditingkatkan lagi, serta kembali lagi permasalahan utama dari berbagai pendekatan yang baru adalah financing ataupun anggaran. Permasalahan terkait investor juga itu masih menjadi permasalahan juga sama juga di-highlight oleh Pak Saud terkait bagaimana sih cost dari NBS ini sendiri, dan karena cost dari NBS ini masih belum terlalu jelas, apalagi di negara berkembang seperti Indonesia, jadinya investor juga dan public sektor juga masih kurang yakin untuk memberikan investasi terkait dengan natural-based solution seperti itu. Mungkin kita pindah dulu sedikit ke section selanjutnya, yaitu question and answer. Ada beberapa pertanyaan yang telah saya kumpulkan dan ada mungkin karena keterbatasan waktu kita hanya bisa mengadres 2 pertanyaan saja. Pertanyaan pertama, there are 2 questions for each of you, for 4 of you actually. So the first one is, thank you for the comprehensive explanation. Considering the importance of both top-down and grassroots approach to successfully implement NBS system, what do you think about the public versus public-private financing scheme for NBS in developing countries to promote the implementation? Or in Indonesia, dengan mempertimbangkan pendekatan top-down dan juga grassroots, apa pendapat Anda mengenai skema pembiayaan publik versus swasta dan juga untuk implementasi NBS pada negara berkembang? Mungkin start from Dr. Alex because this Dr. Miguel actually.
Yeah, it's a very enriching session today. We're almost 3 hours in, and it almost feels like we've just started because it's been such an interesting discussion going. I think like private partnership, it's something that needs to be unpacked a bit more. So what public and what private? The public sector as it exists now has the problem of compartmentality. So departmentalization of infrastructure versus nature versus people, social policies. So I think, some of the governmental structures need to be reconsidered to be better suited for nature-based solution schemes. Then private involvement involves many different actors that need to be considered. Nature-based solutions can be an elite capture project. So that's one risk that needs to be considered, for example, that it doesn't become green gentrification or green displacement. But there's many ways in which private actors can be incorporated in, for example, global South situations, small-scale cooperatives, social enterprises that are focused on everyday environment. So I think this is a very interesting question, but that needs to be unpacked more. It's not just one sector, which is the public, and one sector, which is the private. There's many configurations that could be experimented with.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Miguel, for the answer. Maybe any of you want to give an insight for this topic?
Pak Dana.
Oh, silakan Ibu Yuni.
Ya, terkait PPP ya,
Ya,
Public Private Partnership. Oke, saat ini justru Kota Bandung ini sedang mengupayakan untuk pembangunan kolaboratif seperti ini. Itu mengingat tadi tantangan yang terakhir saya sebutkan terkait anggaran, maka kita berusaha agar kegiatan-kegiatan yang sifatnya strategis itu bisa dikerjasamakan dengan badan usaha milik negara ataupun dengan swasta melalui pelelangan seperti itu, pelelangan investasi. Karena memang ada keuntungan dan memang ada kelemahannya memang untuk PPP ini sendiri ya. Keuntungannya bahwa dari pihak swasta akan membangunkan infrastruktur untuk pemerintah Kota Bandung yang mungkin secara standar akan memenuhi kualitas yang diharapkan seperti itu, daripada ketika dari pihak pemerintah yang dari anggaran sendiri membangun. Saya rasa terkait kualitas juga akan berbeda seperti itu. Kemudian dari sisi masa konsesi yang cukup panjang itu, kemudian kita juga bisa nantinya akan ada pelimpahan pada saat setelah masa konsesi berakhir akan ada pelimpahan operasional dari infrastruktur itu sendiri yang akan memberikan juga peningkatan pendapatan untuk pemerintah Kota Bandung itu sendiri seperti itu. Jadi saya rasa memang kami sangat sepakat ya dengan adanya metode public-private partnership ini sangat cukup membantu pemerintah dalam mengatasi permasalahan pembangunan infrastruktur terutama di Kota Bandung. Begitu Pak Dana, terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Bu Yuni atas jawabannya. So Bandung government also start to establish public-private partnerships for strategic development such as infrastructure. But so the public-private partnership scheme is a good financing scheme for implementing NBS actually. So maybe we can move on to the second question or the last question for this section. So the question is actually for Dr. Alex. So the natural condition of Indonesia territory are very diverse, from the existence of volcanic ring pads crossed by the earth plate and many other characteristics. So how to formulate the level of need for the work program through the SDGs method so that the sustainable city based on nature can be implemented? Or in Indonesia, kondisi alam Indonesia sangat beragam, mulai dari pegunungan berapi dan lain-lainnya. Melalui metode SDGs, apakah dapat diterapkan nature-based solution dan dihubungkan juga dengan kota yang berkelanjutan? So maybe Alex, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for the question. I think it's another great question. And I think it's one of these challenges, maybe a bit which South outlined, it's this challenge of scale, So I think even within a city, every single small scale local project will need its local solutions. You'll need solutions within, a section of a city where we have different communities, different ecosystems in different parts of the city. And then the whole city as itself, as Miguel outlined, we want to connect all the various different projects, and it's at those scales where we can really see the benefits. So of course I think there's definitely not going to be one size fits all in terms of understanding how nature-based solutions will roll out. And I think every time we look at a different city or we look at a different application, we'll need to reassess. So the solutions are multi-scale, and our understanding and our solutions that we'll need will require all these things from private and public partnerships. We need all the experts, the spatial planners. And again, I'll quote Andy, I think every time we need to think, solutions for what, when, why, whom, and how, and I think that will always be the case. If I go towards my expertise, which is the spatial modeling, each time we're going to need new data, new understandings. Ecosystems have different behaviors. So I think, the challenge in the Indonesian context is even greater in terms of understanding the various environmental contexts. The social contexts are very different. Jakarta is in a very different situation to some of the islands all out in Sulawesi or Borneo. Jakarta's the situation, the planning issues in Jakarta are dramatically different to those in Borneo. So I think, Indonesia faces a huge challenge in terms of NBS. But I think, again, finally, NBS is a step change in the way we're thinking about planning. So, of course, I think we're still at the stage of saying it's a fantastic solution to do. This is what we should do. But now we need to start getting more and more evidence-based and the models and economic models and so on to support implementation.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for the answer. Maybe, Pak Saud, do you want to add something?
Yeah, indeed. I like you highlight the NBS as the step changes, Alex. When dealing with disasters, and apologize, I'm coming from disasters lands, and I'm using the word disasters. NBS is not only for disasters, of course. It also deals with biodiversity conservation and so on. But we can come up with the delineation, with the impact changes, with the areas where interventions can be. It can be from the very neighborhood, very very local. But we know some problems can be tackled when it deals with the larger areas beyond municipalities, beyond boundaries, and the problem that Bandung, for example, is dealing with. It's not only within Bandung City, but also other neighboring administration units. And this is where also again NBS can play an important role, because when we define the ecosystem, the boundary would be beyond the administration unit as well. And again, the example of Jakarta, for example, the intervention would be beyond one province or even several provinces as well, because the large scale and also I would say the megacity magnitude of Jakarta would bring the socio-economic and as well as political interaction with the different cities, and I think that's where it validates to see it as a step changes. And again, we need more evidence, and I invite my colleagues Miguel and Alex for other opportunity to discuss about what kind of examples that we can bring here, not only to Indonesia but also bring it back from here to other regions, other part of the globe as well, which I think would be valid, because this is what we need. There are common characteristics among urban in the global south, that drainage problem with poverty condition, limited blah blah blah. But I think if we share, and the private sector private public partnership earlier, it's also important to discuss. And I fully agree, what is the private is also another definition that needs to be highlighted. But again, it needs to bring this idea to involve the way we develop our city, the way we develop our even word, I think would consider how nature is very important at the heart of that development. And one thing I would like to highlight, why Indonesia Association Planner is invited here, because we know that hopefully through these meetings, it can also attract Andy and also his colleagues to, let's say, bring this at the nationwide rather than only in the city level, as well as Tony's networks. Yeah, I think over, Dana.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Saud atas tanggapannya. Jadi memang salah satu challenge dari NBS itu sendiri adalah skala atau level dari penerapan dana based solution itu sendiri. Dan memang setiap proyek membutuhkan solusi berskala lokal yang memiliki karakteristik yang berbeda-beda menyesuaikan dari sifat dari lokal itu sendiri. Dan memang seperti yang selalu dijelaskan tadi, multidisciplinary dan juga multi-scale approach sangat ditekankan dalam penerapan nature-based solution, serta pentingnya kolaborasi memang sangat diperlukan, baik itu dari private sector dan juga sektor-sektor seperti government dan juga expertise lainnya, dan juga more evidence-based ataupun berbagai contoh dan lesson learned dari berbagai negara juga sangat diperlukan untuk penerapan nature-based solution di negara-negara berkembang, terutama di Indonesia. Okay, maybe that's a wrap for this section. I would like to conclude some of the point that will be the summary or the conclusion for this section, for this webinar. Jadi NBS.
Conclusion, may I only raise
Oh
one?
yes. Okay, Padi, go ahead.
Yeah, only just one comment.
Yep.
I think Bu Yuni and Pak Saud, Bandung is really a good case, I think, for the city who abandon the natural landscape and also the nature itself. Yeah, I think we need some honest recognition, yeah, that Bandung, when we went to colleagues in 1990s, is colder than now. Is now hotter, I guess. So NBS is actually an appropriate approach for Bandung to reclaim the nature of Bandung itself. Yeah. So I am concerned with that kind of message, and hopefully later there will be honest recognition on what the state of change of Bandung in the case of nature itself. Yeah. So that's my comment, and I am a big supporter of NBS to our Indonesian cities, especially for the small cities in the eastern zone of Indonesia who has plenty of abundant biodiversity assets. And let's do some national and Bandung one example that we can learn from the past. How should manage our cities? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andi, for the feedback about the Bandung characteristic in implementing a nature-based solution. And maybe we will go next to the conclusion section. So, NBS mesti dikategorikan sebagai pendekatan yang sangat baru dan memang memerlukan berbagai pendekatan dan juga evidence yang lebih lagi agar bisa diterapkan di Indonesia dan juga negara berkembang lainnya. Dan Kota Bandung seperti yang disebutkan tadi itu memang sangat strategis dan memang sudah ada beberapa strategi penanganan terkait dengan yang berbasiskan alam seperti normalisasi sungai, revitalisasi kualitas air, namun memang belum dieksplisitkan sebagai nature-based solution, dan itu memang mesti perlu ditindaklanjuti ke depannya. Lalu dukungan kebijakan yang terintegrasi, skala fungsionalitas, spatial scale, kolaborasi, dan pengetahuan publik itu memang sangat diperlukan untuk menerapkan nature-based solution, dan penggunaan perangkat-perangkat seperti invest, pemetaan partisipatif, juga pemodelan konektivitas itu sangat akan membantu untuk penerapan nature-based solution di Indonesia. Dan juga mungkin itu saja untuk hari ini. Saya ingin mengingatkan kembali kepada partisipan di Zoom dan YouTube dan diharapkan dapat mengisi daftar hadir dan juga kuesioner yang telah di-share melalui kolom chat Zoom dan juga YouTube Live. Dan kami juga meng-share pendaftaran untuk studi grup terkait nature-based solution yang juga dapat diakses di chat box Zoom dan juga YouTube. Just a quick reminder, participant on Zoom and YouTube, please fill the attendance list and also the questionnaire that has been shared through our Zoom chat and also YouTube Live. We also open for the NBS study group, so you can also access the link in the Zoom chat box and also YouTube live chat. Saya juga ingin menginformasikan untuk memfollow sosial media kami sebagaimana tertera di slide untuk mengetahui update dan penelitian kami selanjutnya dan apa saja kegiatan yang akan kami laksanakan. Dengan ini maka untuk terakhir kali saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada para pembicara, Dr. John Miguel, Dr. Alex Lerner, Dr. Saul Sagala, dan Ibu Yunisri Handayani STMN atas presentasi yang sangat menarik, dan juga kepada diskusan kami, Dr. Hendrikus Andi dan juga Mr. Tony Wijarsono MRP. Dan juga kepada seluruh partisipan dan undangan yang telah hadir pada diskusi kali ini. Dan mewakili RDI, pemateri dan diskusan, saya mengucapkan terima kasih banyak telah bergabung dan dengan kami pada hari ini. Kami berharap apa yang telah dipelajari dan juga didapatkan pada hari ini dapat mendukung upaya masa depan dalam mengimplementasikan NBS untuk mewujudkan kota berkelanjutan. On behalf of RDI, our panelists and our discussion, I would like to thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that what we have learned and what we have gained today can support the future efforts for implementing NBS to realize to reach the sustainable cities. Selamat sore dan sampai jumpa di lain kesempatan. Good afternoon and see you again in the next time. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Dana,
Thank you very much.
Miguel.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, discussants, as well. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Dana.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Nadia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Udah semua? Udah kan ya? Oh my God.